7:03. I would like to call us to order. Aleda.
All right, I'm gonna roll call right now. Carrie Chomsky.
Present.
Robert Del Rosario will be late. Farid Javandel.
Present.
Ken McCloskey.
Present.
Chair Susan Reeves.
Present. Thank you. And now for approval of the minutes from April 27th. Any notation, changes?
I move approval.
Second.
Can we have a vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Nope. Great. And now it's time for public comment. Anyone wanting to share a comment? I think this comment is for, I think this is for the Washington 6-point, right?
No, we don't. What Washington is?
Oh,
The stop sign for? I mean,
Actually, it's Washington Avenue east of Masonic, I believe.
okay, a different one. Okay, great.
I think it should be public.
Yeah. Aaron Frank.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name's Aaron Frank. I live on 728 Carmel. First, I wanted to thank you all for your decision to install a four-way stop at Carmel and Washington last year. It's just been installed, and I just wanted to let you know that it has already made a huge difference in the neighborhood. I've been stopped by people who don't live in the neighborhood saying, hey, did you see this four-way stop was installed? Or our neighbors that live right on the corner with a big picture window looking at that intersection say that they can just watch people cross the street easier. And so it's made a huge difference. We're really happy with that, so thank you. I'm here tonight just to sort of follow up at when you made that decision to install the four-way stop. There were a couple of other improvements that were part of that decision, including the crosswalk and the ADA compliant sidewalks. And in speaking with Aleda, we understand that for those improvements to be made, they need to be included in the public works contracts that are coming up, the thermoplast, whatever those contracts are. And we just wanted to request that you request of Public Works to include those in the upcoming contracts so that we can get those installed as well.
Great.
Yeah, we are aware of that.
Yeah. Did we talk about it a little bit last meeting too? No. No. Okay. Thank you.
Hi, Amy Smolens, Albany Strollers and Rollers, we have more than 650 member households. Just want to let you know. May is Bike Month, so it's coming to a close, but I just want to give you a little kind of report, an update for the month. AS&R provided bicycle valet parking at the Arts and Green Festival on Sunday, May 7th. And then 4 days later, we organized and ran the Energizer Station, the Bike to Work Day Energizer Station at the Ohlone Greenway and Marin Avenue. And more than 600 bicyclists came by, got great swag bags, got food and drink, tea and coffee. Generally had a good time. Thanks to Kim's Cafe and Royal Ground Coffee, local businesses who donated food and drink. And we also appreciate the owners of Berkeley Bikes and Skateboards, Blue Heron, and Bikes on Solano. They came out and gave free safety checks to anybody that wanted them, and that was great. Then this past Saturday, our volunteers helped out at the APAL Bike Rodeo, where kids got free helmets and learned to ride more safely, so that was really good. And it's not an event that we're involved in, but tomorrow night, FYI, is a bike-in movie, which the city's rec department runs, and they're going to show Cool Runnings, which is about the 1988 Olympic bobsled team, Jamaican Olympic bobsled team. So that'll be played at 6:30, and they'll have free bike valet parking, and apparently lots and lots of popcorn. Also want to let you know that a few days ago, Aleda Andrino Chavez and I took our tape measures out, and we marked locations for 4 more of the popular bike racks that ASNR funds along with local businesses and one new public pump. So the bike racks are sponsored by Orange Theory Fitness, Winkler Real Estate Group, Grove Salon, and the woman from Grove Salon came running out and said, "Oh my God," she was so excited that we were measuring for that, and Francesco Papalia. And the public pump is sponsored by Zaytun Restaurant. So we appreciate the city working with us on this and the businesses working with us, which is great. We'll have 56 of these bike racks by the time the city installs these, and 2 public pumps. So hopefully the city will get this done soon, and we'll see bikes all over them, and yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Good.
Switch to this display. Thanks, Brendan. Is there a button? Actually, this computer is probably out of battery. And it's on VGA instead of HDMI. VGA. It could be because my computer is not outputting a signal. Well, let me just say that when the neighbors were good enough to implement their own, this area has changed, watch out for this new traffic treatment. And I have a picture, but they actually put up realtor signs with poster boards on them saying, "New stop sign ahead." And I can see it on my screen, but it's not coming up, so that's kind of odd. They used about 6 different signs, including about 6 poster boards on realtor signs, and then they also put new signs right underneath the stop signs. So there was no question at all that there was something new going on, and that seemed to help with the incidence of use of the stop sign. So it was actually something that I had requested that Public Works look into, and since they didn't do it, the neighbors stepped up. Yeah, I need to hit the mirroring, thanks. Sorry, if I go here, there we go. I'll click on here.
Oh, there.
Okay. So they had these great signs. Oops, not that one. I have one of, there we go. So it was a great treatment. I'd love to see Public Works do things like this in the future because it really announced what was going on. The stop signs looked like they'd been there forever, but obviously they hadn't. So thanks to the neighborhood. There are the stop sign ahead signs like this, but because they look like they've been there forever, they don't jump out at you in the same way that these unique signs do, with the flag and being on the roadway in a different way. It's just different. I mean, they use some different colors.
Well, I think the community can be involved and do those things.
Well, perhaps I'll collect their signs and use them in the future. Thank you.
I actually have one too. This way. So I don't have any pictures or anything, but this week was a huge week for me as a citizen of Albany because the crosswalk is starting to take shape on Pierce Street Pierce Street Park. And it's the reason I'm even here is because I worked on that park and Peggy Thompson looped me into being here. So it's an interesting combination of what Peggy grabbed me in to do, and it's been a really long time coming, and it's so incredible to see. And so you guys did a great job getting us one or two crosswalks, I think, but anyway, thank you. All right, any other comments? No. So the police report?
I'm sorry, the police department's had a busy couple of months. We haven't gotten new data from them again this month.
Okay.
We'll track them down and try again next month.
Okay, thank you. I think I'm on point to do this one. Discussion and possible action on matters related. Okay, 6.1, report on the city council approval of the 2017-2019 Traffic and Safety Commission work plan. So I was able to go and present our plans, and instead of them trying to trim them down, they, if anything, they added to them. Actually, first, in terms of accomplishments, they made some corrections, which I think, I don't know why we didn't think of this too, but we hadn't put anything down about the sidewalk bill, our participation in that, which I think that we did a lot of work on that. They also had a kind of a question, or pointed out that we had included the grants, and I think it is really important for us to note that we don't submit the grants, but we have incredible staff support. And yes,
I mean, really.
but it was an accurate kind of observation, I think. So thank you for all the work you do on those. The other, so they noted that they really wanted us to consider or keep our eyes open for advocacy at the state and federal level. They pointed out that there's a SB2 that might have some funds that I haven't done any research on this, but some funds that might be available for some of the things that we do. Also, the soda tax apparently involves probably some funding for pedestrian, for school children walking to school. So I think that was a really good point out for us to look into a little bit. That was, some of the other ones that they said we already had on the list, so, but the list was long, so I didn't expect them to memorize it, so. But they seemed encouraging to the work that we do, and they thought it was good. And they did not prioritize anything for us either. I thought they might do that. All right, any questions? No?
Did they talk about how much funds might be available from the soda tax?
No, they just said, I don't
Keep it in
think they
mind.
did. I don't think they mentioned any, they just wanted us to have that in our research. And
That's correct, and I frankly haven't been following it real closely myself, so I'm not quite sure what is available, but apparently as part of the discussions during the creation of the soda tax, there was a suggestion that traffic and safety look at safe routes to schools as part of the program that's funded by soda taxes.
So 6.2, review of proposed amendments to planning and zoning code related to bicycle parking requirements in new residential projects.
Yes, the Planning and Zoning Commission, well, based on the voter approval last fall of Measure N1, the Planning and Zoning Commission is undertaking a review of all the city's parking requirements for new development projects. And as part of that review, they have drafted, as part of your packet this evening, some bicycle parking standards, which would be a new section to the parking requirements in the city's municipal code. So I provided the current draft for you. The commission, I think, will have at least one more meeting on this. They've had a couple already to kind of scope out what they wanted to work on. And the draft that you have this evening, went to them at a recent meeting, I think several weeks ago. So what we thought you would be particularly interested in is bicycle parking, and this draft is provided for you for any comments either this evening, or if you wanted, as individual members, wanted to attend a future commission meeting to provide specific details, that would be helpful. I'm sure the commission would appreciate that. It would be going to the City Council for approval. This would be an ordinance, so it requires City Council approval. It would be going to City Council probably the earliest in July and perhaps more likely in September. So, like I said, this is really for you to provide any comments to the Planning and Zoning Commission as they look at these changes. Yeah, but to answer any questions.
Is there any particular role that Traffic and Safety Commission has in formulating this as opposed to Planning and Zoning? I mean, it seems like it's mostly, it's not something that happens on the roadways. So what role do you see us having in the?
Strictly speaking, the Planning and Zoning Commission kind of takes care of the planning and zoning code. So, and that's in their ordinances that they have to review drafts, and there's kind of a very formal process. You don't have as current kind of enabling legislation, which I'd love to work with the commission on sometime soon, that formally describes what your role is. But knowing the commission, I thought you would want to just be in that loop.
Okay, so it's just our chance to say what we think, even though it's not really a commission matter per se.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Can we hold
Yeah.
for public comments?
Yeah. Any other questions from us?
What were they basing these on? What did they use as sort of source materials?
I'm sorry, I don't know what I'd have to have Ann Hirsch, our city planner, get that information for you. I believe that she just looked at surveys of other cities, and there is an association of bicycle parking that have standards that these are exceed, but they have a kind of a template for a bicycle parking ordinance as well. So I think it was kind of patching together different things and adjusting them for the scale of development that we see in Albany.
Okay.
No question? Any other questions? Any public comment?
Yeah, hi, sorry for interrupting, but if you were going to have discussion, I wanted to just make the point that this is absolutely your area, because you are the Active Transportation Advisory Committee or Commission, I'm not sure which one it is. So this is absolutely something that you should weigh in on. You're deemed the experts, and this is your wheelhouse. So I have some specifics, but if I say that, do you want to have more discussion before bringing in some specific questions I have? But I think this is something.
We just had questions so far.
Okay. So I'm really thrilled that you guys are getting a chance to look at this, because it's been something that hasn't been regulated at all. And so I Googled Berkeley's plan, because figure they have a good one. So I looked at them just to see if I had any comparisons or it would bring up any questions. I live on Kains Avenue, and there's lots of apartments, and lots of my friends and neighbors have apartments, and they've gotten their bikes stolen because they've had to lock them outside to the railings and things like that, and it's been a real problem. And so I really appreciate the fact that you guys are planning and zoning will require secure bicycle parking for new dwellings. Just wondering if there's any way to get planning and zoning to work with existing apartments and condos, because there are so many of them around here. And it would be nice if things could be improved by your input, planning and zoning's input, Albany Strollers and Rollers input, somebody, so the people now, like every day on Nextdoor, you read about someone who's having their bike stolen, and then sometimes people give up. I'm also really happy to see that commercial properties where there's a change of use and remodeled commercial or mixed-use buildings shall provide bicycle parking facilities, because that really hasn't been the case. It's been kind of a crapshoot whether sometimes I would speak to someone at a business that's changing hands, or someone else in Strollers and Rollers, or a lady would be talking with them about something, and they'd say, gee, I could really use a bike rack. And they'd say, oh, well, I've got someone, and she'd match us up with a bike rack. But, so that's great, because you see that bike racks are so full. I mean, especially nice weather like this, they're always packed to the gills. Every type of bike, kids' bikes, scooters, everything. I did notice that in Berkeley's regulations, they had a requirement for commercial establishment to have one long-term parking per establishment, or one per 10,000 square foot, which would be for employees or staff, because you shouldn't expect someone who's working at a place 8 hours to have to pop his head out or her head out every couple hours to make sure their bike's still there. I'm wondering why Albany doesn't include that, and I think that's something that should be included, whether it's lockers or a bike cage or something like that. They also define bike parking facility, a space exclusively for the storage of bicycles. This includes bicycle racks and bicycle storage, but they don't require or even recommend it anywhere, and I think that's something that a cage or something at a business or a multi-use dwelling, a bike cage, is something that really, that's very, very beneficial for everyone. I don't know how many units that would be the minimum, okay, this number of units or something, but that's something that I think should be recommended. They define it, but they don't recommend it or mention it anywhere. And I'd also like to see specific standards for some types of racks and lockers recommended, with photos or drawings, this or this or this, because the explanation of 2 contact points, blah, 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 I think a picture's worth 1,000 words, and I think that would really help people understand what is acceptable bike parking. And also specifying that public lockers, if they're going to be public lockers, should be bike link lockers if they're not going to be exclusive for their staff and they want something separate, but that if they're providing public lockers, they should match the thousands of lockers that are already in the East Bay. And I would also like them to mention that if a business owner or a landlord has any questions regarding bicycle facilities and locations, that they can consult with Albany Strollers and Rollers, since we have expertise and we also have a program in place to help with that funding. And whether it's a bike rack or something else that they might want, it's something that we might be flexible to help them out if it's going to be providing bike parking for the public. We can recommend the locations that would be safe, and then it would help everybody. So those are my questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Discussion.
I actually found something, or I was led to something, I should say, in the Green Building Standards Code. States Title 24, Part 11. And could you guys switch to the document viewer? Let's focus that. Dear.
Oh.
Not quite sure how to focus it.
I think it's good enough.
Yeah. So the key here is that for long-term bicycle parking, this code, which is part of our state code, is to provide either one, covered lockable enclosures with permanently anchored racks for bicycles, lockable bicycle rooms with permanently anchored racks, or lockable permanently anchored bicycle lockers. So there's this idea of enclosure and separation that I think is pretty key. I think this says it nicely, and I'm happy to pass this along afterwards. You don't have to write it down.
Yeah.
Um,
And it sets standards for when this is required.
I liked Amy's idea of recommending that the specific vendor for the public lockers be one that matches the surrounding community. I wonder if, for the sake of a standard, it might be better to describe that in language rather than naming the vendor, because we don't know if this code will be in place in 5 years and Bike Link may have changed their name, they may not exist anymore, they may have fallen out of favor and something else will be the most commonly used. It seems like for longevity, a comment that says locker vendors should be chosen to match the most prevalent existing public lockers in the community.
That is probably wise. I don't think we could probably
These things do have a
recommend
long
it.
life, and it's better
Yeah,
for their for the effectiveness of the code over its 20 or 30 or 40-year life to have some more generic language like that.
but a picture sounds interesting. I don't know if that gets,
Pictures can be, diagrams can be helpful. The main thing to understand about the planning and zoning code is it is a law, and we don't grant exceptions to it unless they're extraordinary circumstances. So it needs to work in a lot of different circumstances. We can't just grant variances because we feel like it. You can only grant a variance if there are extraordinary site conditions. We can use an illustrative illustration, but again, the wording has to be done carefully, or else people will be stuck and not be able to comply with the code requirements.
And I would think the same would apply to any suggestion to consult with Albany Strollers and Rollers or something like that. It's not, I don't know if that language per se is appropriate in the law, but it would be nice if there was a place to put kind of additional comments for the benefit of commissioners and developers that could just be helpful, even though they're not part of a standard that they're required to follow. Is there an appropriate place for language for these pictures and suggestions like that?
One thing that we could do, if we felt like it would be beneficial to everyone, is have some parking design guidelines that are a separate document, and so have the municipal code say consult with design guidelines. Like, that's what we do for normal architectural design review. We don't
Right.
put the specifics in there.
Right.
We have a separate design guideline that we update every 10 years or so. And so we could have a bicycle design guideline that could reference, it could say bike link, it could say people are welcome to consult with Albany Strollers and Rollers, and anything else. Again, this is a municipal code. It has to do with process, and we can't delegate the city can't delegate to a nonprofit entity its legal authority to process an application. So we'd have to kind of nuance that a little bit.
So would this guideline document be developed at the same time as the changes made to the code, or would those be two separate projects done by planning and zoning in different meetings?
I would say different meetings.
Different meetings.
But you could adopt the code and then shortly thereafter have the design guidelines that just strengthen it and illustrate it.
But the code would refer to the design guidelines?
Yes.
But nonetheless, the code would be written and adopted before the design guidelines exist.
And we would put some language in there that gives us,
The leeway to,
right.
okay.
that would give us meaning traffic and safety, or us meaning
Staff.
staff?
Or
Okay.
the commission. I don't think it would be appropriate to have planning applications come through the Traffic and Safety Commission. That would be overwhelming to this commission and
No, no,
would
no.
be
I mean,
unnecessarily.
but the design guidelines would be created by
Staff.
staff.
Staff, yes. And we
And then
present that to you.
adopted by
By
planning and,
Oh, no, ultimately, the city council would have to adopt those.
Okay.
Well, I guess my main question is about, like, Amy has gotten up and made some good suggestions, and I, at least, I'm generally in favor of, supportive of the ideas behind the suggestions, but my question is, do we need to advocate for these suggestions again in another venue, or if we as a commission say, we like Amy's ideas, let's find the right place to suggest that they be included, is that enough, or is it worth having a Strollers and Rollers member speak to planning and zoning when they consider it, and then again, when they consider the design guideline, maybe we should just try to have advise Strollers and Rollers to stay on top of this? And
I think the latter would be the most efficient way, that when it goes back to planning and zoning, strollers and rollers be there to address the commission.
Okay, so in a way, the most important thing for tonight is not for us to convey our support for what Strollers and Rollers is saying, but instead, if there's anything that we as individuals think of that is separate from that, this is our chance to say it. Yeah.
So with that in mind,
Yes.
I'm interested in looking at the table, especially.
Yeah.
We might want to throw it up on the screen, but so residential, the first portion is residential mixed-use development, and multiple family dwelling. Both start out with one exterior bicycle rack. Well, I'm sorry, the mixed-use development starts out with one exterior bicycle rack space per 1,500 square feet of commercial floor area, and one interior bicycle space per residential unit. I'd be interested in, along with this, changing that to at least one protected bicycle space per unit. Just being interior, if it's in some location in a back hallway somewhere next to a door that people go out that somebody could come in, that's not protected.
So enclosed and secure is what we're looking for.
That would be good. So protected, and then you define protected elsewhere using language similar to the, yeah. But enclosed and secured would be,
For me, interior implies also weatherproof, more so than, say, a bike cage.
yeah.
So I prefer going towards, the concept of a bike room rather than a bike cage, if we're going for the one per residential unit.
So you want it to be both interior to protect from the elements and secure to protect from
Yeah,
other people?
yeah. I mean, if we're trying to do something that's, usable and good quality, I always keep my bike indoors. It lasts longer that way. So it doesn't
People
seem,
can't steal the components off of it.
yeah, it's not visible to potential thieves. It's secure from the elements. To me, that's sort of the highest end, short of having individual secure lockers per person.
But
Just
Ken
have-
is right that an indoor facility could still be not very secure against theft.
Sure. So we specify
So we do
secure.
have to say both.
It, has to have keys. Whether or not we specify that within that facility there are racks, the ability to lock your bike so that your neighbor can't come and take your bike. I mean, I don't know how detailed we want to get in that, but that may be something that becomes part of the design guidelines to go into those details, because our design guidelines can evolve much more rapidly than the zoning code can. And so I think my general comment to that end is a lot of these things that are being suggested, for example, what type of bike lockers, we can say bike lockers that are commonly accessible, subject to determination by staff. So that staff can determine, hey, the standard right now is bike link, so we suggest you go with that. 5 years from now, maybe something different. But I think it gives us more flexibility. And as Jeff said, we don't want to waste time scheduling coming before the commission when staff can, in a 5-minute phone call, resolve a concern, I think.
So if we go back to what I threw up before, the last sentence before the bullets or the numbers was acceptable parking facilities shall be convenient from the street and shall meet one of the following. So I think that helps in that way. And it is general, so covered lockable enclosures with permanently anchored racks, lockable bicycle rooms with anchored racks, or lockable permanently anchored bicycle lockers. You might want to add something like all of these shall be sheltered from the weather.
Right.
So you're thinking to take that language,
I think it's a start.
yeah, and use that language in place of,
Well, I think in the table,
Yeah.
you would refer to a interior and secure
yep,
space.
enclosed and protected or interior.
I think secure and protected from the elements are really the two criteria that I would,
Secure.
Secure and protected from the elements.
Yeah. I think somewhere in it, whether in the standards or in the code, should be that it's readily accessible from the street. Having something where you got to go down a staircase to the basement, hauling your cargo bike is completely ridiculous. So that's,
Shouldn't
again,
that be under the requirement?
I think
then?
that fits well within the zoning code as part of a requirement of, saying
Yeah.
that it's readily accessible without having to go up or down stairs. That's
So
not going to be something that we're wanting to change often. So I wouldn't worry about that being in the design guidelines versus in the code.
Accessible from the street and not requiring movement via stairs?
Yeah. Right.
Something like that?
Whatever terminology you think fits best, but I mean, if it's accessible via elevator, okay, as long as it's a good-sized elevator, not, a little tiny thing that you have to turn your bike vertical or something. But
I think we may have to be careful with the word accessible because it generally has a different meaning in the context of accessible to.
Well,
Americans
whether
with
it's
Disabilities Act,
level access or level path of travel.
We mean easily usable by people carrying bicycles, but
rolling a
really
bicycle.
accessible in the technical
Rolling a
sense.
bicycle.
Yeah.
I want to carry it.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
I
rolling.
do that every
Yeah.
day at work, and it's a pain.
I'm just saying it, I would, at least in my experience, when a document like this uses the word accessible, they mean in the sense of ADA. which
Right,
is
that's a
not
good
what we're
point.
hearing.
I think we're careful with the words, but as long as it's, level route.
Accessible from the street,
Does that change it?
does that change it?
Because it's like more of a,
I don't think
Phrase?
accessible is quite the right word, because I think Fareed is explaining what he means, that
Yeah.
it should be easy to get your bike in and out without having to lift it
It's
a
funny,
lot,
we mean
but-
ease of access,
Yeah,
not accessibility under ADA.
Yeah, look at-
and not just ease of access, but ease of moving your bicycle in and out of the
Right.
zone.
You want a level path of travel with adequate width. Whether or not we want to specify anything with regards to doors, because when you've got doors with automatic closure, which is often the case for fire code requirements, now it's hard to
get
get
it
through it
in.
with your bike. So,
Aren't new automatic closure doors required to have buttons for
right, so
assist?
if you've got a button, to meet ADA requirements, that's great for someone with a bike. The only caution there is, and that's, if it's going to be there anyway, we have no real
Can't assume
path
that with
around that, but
older-
Yeah, you push a button, you take your bike, you go, and the door's open for, 20 seconds. Have you just defeated the secure aspect? We're not going to capture everything, but I would be cautious how much, we call
Detail.
for some things that
Yeah.
might
Yeah.
end up defeating other things we're trying to achieve.
level path, adequate width.
Yeah. I mean, to me, that's pretty basic. Should cover it,
I think it has to be level path to the street.
right?
May I ask a question or hopefully it's a clarifying question and not to add to the variables. So any new multifamily housing is going to be completely accessible with an elevator. Would there be a scenario where it would be preferable for each individual unit to have like a bicycle parking nook of some sort within the unit? So you have your bike in your unit? Or,
If they provide that as an alternative to a bike room, I mean, I would say if that's a higher level of service and they're willing to provide it, that could be provided in lieu of a shared secure bike parking area. That seems
I think the
pretty
text that we
reasonable.
have is flexible enough to encapsulate that. Covered lockable enclosures with permanently anchored racks. So if there was a closet in the unit, it would just have to have something to bolt to.
yeah, I could visualize an entryway where you come in and right there you've got an integrated bike hook.
And your door is the secure closure.
Yeah, and you've got your stuff with you, which is
Yeah.
more comforting than anything else. But it does probably involve the hassle of taking your bike in the elevator. Now, the elevator is going to be big enough to take a gurney, so that's not going to be a problem unless there's a trailer, and then maybe the trailer's down in the bike room. I don't know. It can get complicated all of a sudden. But I was just wondering whether there was a scenario where providing room within the unit would be something you would think would be acceptable.
I'm in agreement that a
think-
clause somewhat like that covers that.
I think we can,
I think
Well,
so.
I think we agree with the principle that providing accommodation for bike in each unit is as good or better than a shared bike room. And I think we hope that the language that we're suggesting here already takes that and already implies that we don't need to call that case out. But if you think there's some confusion and we should be more specific about that.
It was just, it sounded like what you were visualizing when you were discussing this was, a bike room right inside the entry to the units, in the garage or some, wherever. And I was just kind of trying to see if there was other, I know me personally, I wouldn't put my bike in one of those. I just take it up to my unit. And I think a lot of us kind of think that way, but.
Has enough space for it.
And that then gets into the design review process where the developer has to demonstrate there's room to bring a bike in, maneuver it, get it up on the hook, and you can still use your unit without tripping over your bike all the time.
I don't have the picture handy, but, over at, on Pierce Street, in at least one of the units, there's a guard shack in the parking garage, and there's a huge set of bike racks that are oversubscribed. Bikes are just piled in there. And it works because the guard shack is right there, along with the gate. But if that was located anywhere else, it wouldn't be nearly as secure or valuable.
Yeah. I mean, I think what's clear from this discussion is we need to be flexible. We're trying to achieve an end result. What method is used to achieve it, as long as it satisfies staff, that it performs in a certain fashion, where you put it isn't so critical.
But it does sound like as is needs, as it's written, we need more protection. We are looking for
Yeah,
more
well, I think
protection.
the language that, Ken has provided seems to address that in a sufficiently broad fashion.
I think so.
And in terms of processing these applications, any new construction goes to the Planning and Zoning Commission. So it's helpful to have, and maybe it's a change of use in a commercial building that may not involve commission formal hearing, but anything that's new construction. So it'll be a very public process. This would be part of their application that goes before the Planning and Zoning Commission. And everybody can
So I think
reviewing it.
it's useful to have language that the commission, the Planning and Zoning Commission will already see, that will remind them of what our goals are. But I don't think we can elucidate exactly how those goals need to be met in the language. I think the language needs to somehow express the goals in a way that when the commission looks at it, they'll be able to look at the application and just know by intuitively whether what they're proposing meets these goals or not. And if it does, then what we want is for the language in the code to be strong enough so that if the commission looks at a project and says, yeah, that meets the code, then strollers and rollers would be satisfied and we would be satisfied. You know, all the stakeholders don't want to have to go to every meeting and verify that they're being careful enough about this. So it's a hard balance to find. Susan, it looks like
I just
Amy
want
has
to keep going
another
down the
comment.
table here.
So as, these aren't going to come up every week or anything. It's not every individual. It's, you know, it's a commercial or a multi-use. So it's not like they're going to be coming up so often. So what about putting something that it should be reviewed by Traffic and Safety, because you're the Active Transportation Advisory Committee / Commission? That, you know, that wouldn't take up a ton of your time, but you guys are the ones with the expertise, and I think it should, as is clear from this meeting, that you're putting a lot more specifics, that you might understand it. We don't know who's going to be on planning and zoning when these things come up. Maybe now those people ride bikes and go, oh yeah, this would work, this wouldn't work. But it should fall on you to review it, because that's what you're supposed to do. Is, aren't you supposed to review everything that has a bike or ped or active transportation aspect to it? So I think that should be written in, that you would review the plans and you would have
I
review.
believe our authorities for the public projects. I don't know if it extends to private development.
I think at the very least, we would want to have agendize that particular discussion about whether or not
Yeah.
the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee role should extend. I mean, we brought that to you originally because it's a federal requirement for some funding.
Right.
It wasn't meant to anything more than to check off that box of federal requirements. We know you're interested in bike parking, so that's why this is on your agenda tonight. It really does create an enormous headache for applicants to have to go through two different commissions. An application already goes to planning and zoning 2 or 3 times in most cases, and to have a traffic and safety loop to that, or maybe 2 or 3 of those, while the clock is ticking on how long the city has to process these applications.
Do we feel, along that line, do we feel like we can get enough of the structure of what we're looking for into the parking design guidelines? Or do we feel like an actual review of, I do think if it's some kind of building that affects, their plans affect sidewalks or, you know, shared spaces, we would see it. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely.
But the rest of this is
But this
talking about
probably won't be-
internal to their building or their property.
If it's new construction, it would be almost certainly internal unless there was something about the site conditions that just didn't make sense. But for a change in use of an existing building, it's quite likely that it's a bike rack and a sidewalk, because it may not be feasible to really make it work in other ways. If it's a thin, narrow building, you know, sometimes there aren't other good choices. And you don't normally look at every bike rack placement. But we could figure out a way
Does
to make
the transportation planner function look at plans and their, for remodeling and new construction and their bicycle requirements?
Generally speaking, yeah. I don't think she looks at every single one of them. You know, we get 90 or 100 planning applications a year, so it's not, none of us are looking at all of them except for Ann.
I think the Safeway example was really good. I had to look at the bike corral, and it went really well. Originally, the one question I have is that originally the bike corral or Safeway needed more bicycle racks that were implemented, because we had to accommodate I think the strollers and rollers raised the issue of the the longer bicycles or with trailers, so we had to decrease the number of required bicycle racks that we thought they needed. I only have a question, or maybe clarification for that, is that when it says exterior, is that sidewalk too, or exterior like within the property? I have a concern that we don't have enough space, and if it's like 50,000 square feet of development, you have like 67 racks there.
Right. It's a lot of bike racks. And exterior means a customer can ride up and block their bike before going inside the commercial establishment.
I think we have to add some flexibility there, and I think either we can say if it's within the property, well, that might make sense, but if it's on the public right of way, we'll have to limit up to from, let's say, 25,000 square feet, and then after that, one for every whatever. I don't have an idea. I'm just throwing this.
But wouldn't it be, I mean, wouldn't a project of that size also have a private parking lot, which could be put to use? I mean,
Right.
Replace a few car spaces with a dozen bike racks.
That's right, but I mean, I'm just throwing the other example that they might have, parking lot, but may have, like for instance, we have the dental office. There is an orthodontics office that they have a limited parking space, and we're also looking for bicycle racks there, bicycle parking there. We don't have unlimited space. That's the problem here, too.
Sure.
Well, I mean, would that be a reasonable situation to talk about a variance? I mean, that the code shouldn't necessarily accommodate those difficult cases, but they...
Under state law, you can only grant a variance to a planning and zoning code if you can make very specific findings of unique physical condition of the property. And we rarely, maybe we do one a year when there's some strange shaped lot or something, or very steeply sloped lot. So we really, and we don't like doing that. We feel like we want to defend if we start granting variances all the time,
So you'd rather slightly loosen the code than have a tight code and have more occurrences of allowing a variance to it?
Yeah, that's correct, because we shouldn't be allowing the variances. Yeah. It's bad planning practice to do that.
I do have a couple other questions if the topic is floating a little bit.
Well, we were looking at the table, but you want to go back to more general
One of my
things?
questions is about the table that's on the
Okay.
screen right now. At the top, it talks about one exterior bicycle rack space, which means room to park one bicycle at a bike rack, right? And then lower down, it says one bicycle rack per 1,500 square feet. Is that intended to be something different, or does it mean one rack space?
We should get that clarified. I think that's probably.
Because later, there's a definition of a rack, which I think says that it can accommodate at least 2 bicycles. So this, if you interpret it that way, it's saying there, for each 1,500 square feet of floor area, in the commercial part of the table, for each 1,500 square feet of floor area, you have to have one bicycle rack, which in turn has to be a stationary fixture that accommodates at least 2 bicycles.
Yes.
But I would think that if there were some design of a bicycle rack that accommodated 10 bicycles, we would want to count that as 10, not as 1, or as...
That's a very good observation. We'll figure out what the intent there was. Right.
Okay. And my other question is more general, and I'll wait till we've...
So
finished
back on
talking
the table.
table.
Thank you. I'm worried under commercial that there are no protected spaces required. If I'm working, especially after dark or a long day, I'd really like to have my bicycle protected while I can't pay any attention to it. Unlike customers who might be able to sit in the window and gaze out at their bike, if you're working, you really can't pay any attention to what's going on outside of your workspace, likely.
So is that the same as what's been referred to as long-term? A
think so.
long-term parking
Yeah.
space? Yeah.
They have the general comment of bicycle parking facilities shall be provided in a convenient, highly visible, well-lit area. But I don't think that's quite all that you're talking about.
Well, and our draft here does have a definition of long-term bicycle parking. I think it just doesn't call for it anywhere.
Right, I pointed that out, that Albany's does, but doesn't have a requirement, but Berkeley's has a requirement for commercial establishments to have one long-term parking, i.e. indoor or secure locker per establishment, or one per 10,000 square feet.
And on the last page of,
So that would be what
Of
Ken
the-
was referring to.
on the last page of the draft for Albany, there is a definition of long-term bicycle parking. So clearly it was intended that that should be included in the specifications somewhere. Right, but they wouldn't define it unless they had intended to require it, so I think it's an oversight.
And I think that's, having the long-term bike parking for employees is definitely something we should include. And my experience has been that that's what I have always relied on, and as often as not, is just, sticking my bike in the corner of my office. But, if you're working somewhere you don't have an office, you don't have that option. So I think that.
But an organization could have a policy, or a building could have a policy of allowing bikes in or providing a specific space.
Yeah. I mean, when I worked at, the ice cream store on Solano, I just, stuck my bike in the back room, and that was fine. The storeroom had space. But again, depending on the business, there may not be space, and I think having something that ensures there's a provision for it seems like it would be appropriate to have.
So the suggestion from Strollers and Rollers was to follow the example of the Berkeley Code and require one long-term parking space per establishment or per 10,000 square feet.
Right.
Per establishment up to 10,000 square feet?
Well, per establishment or per 10,000 square feet, whichever is greater.
I see.
I assume. So the one thing I wanted to swing around back to before we finish is this question of what can be done about existing buildings that aren't undergoing this kind of planning review. And that may be a little bit outside the scope of what we're doing tonight, but I'd just like to hear from staff if there's any way we can approach that question.
Right now, no. We don't have a way to require people to do that. We've talked about developing programs for, say, energy efficiency, where there will be a schedule of upgrading buildings. They do assessments and upgrade buildings. And it's possible, either as part of that program or to kind of match the framework of that program, to have a requirement that at a certain point existing buildings upgrade their bicycle parking, just as they might need to upgrade their energy efficiency. But right now, when you build something and you're all finished, you're finished, and you're not required to modify that.
So do you think that, I think the hypothetical energy efficiency program you're talking about was being worked on by the Sustainability Committee. So would
That's
that
right.
be the place to start if somebody wanted to pursue this?
I would keep it separate. That's a very complex program for
Yeah.
other reasons, and I was using that mechanism more as an example than to say make their already complex situation more challenging. But we could, when a project comes along that triggers, with or without that program, you could say, here's a schedule where within 10 years, commercial buildings have to upgrade their buildings to include bike parking, as an example.
When a project comes along, you must bike it. Sorry.
Well, that sounds like a challenge for another day, but something to keep in mind.
Yeah, it's not impossible, but it would be administratively a much more complex effort. But it could, theoretically, we could develop a program to do it.
Where it says, when there's this is applicable with new commercial construction, mixed-use construction, multifamily properties, commercial properties where there's a change of use and remodeled commercial or mixed-use building. Could there be something where if you're remodeling a multi-family unit or multi-unit building to a certain extent, it could kick in? Not if they're sticking in one new bathroom or something, but if there's a major remodel,
That yes.
that'd be possible?
That would be, again, that's something that we've talked about with the sustainability in terms of energy efficiency. It's either on a fixed schedule of a number of years, your property gets triggered, or if you're doing a certain level of work, you've got to bring the energy efficiency of the building up, and we could do the same kind of thing here. And as Ken pointed out, the Green Building Code has some standards that would, I'd have to look at the details of when that particular section is triggered, but that might already, that's a relatively new code section. I think it just became effective this year. But we might start getting some projects that need to comply with that existing requirement, or that's in effect today here.
So at the very least, it'd be good to sort of align with that. And you're saying it might actually supersede our own requirements, or?
It wouldn't supersede, it would,
Tie it.
The Green Building Code applies statewide, and so that's in effect today. If for whatever triggers that particular section, that's happening now. We can use those parameters to say, if you meet this, you comply, or we could modify the requirements to be, require more parking. We couldn't do less. We still have to comply with the Green Building Code, whether we like it or not, which we do. But
Could there be remodel things going on for parking that wouldn't be looped into this? Is that conceivable right now?
For my experience is that for rental housing, remodeling is extremely rare.
Okay.
And it's only really basic stuff that people are doing. And for commercial properties, remodeling happens when tenants turn over, so it just depends on the particular space. Some places turn over a few years and they get redone, and others haven't been touched in decades.
Okay.
Just so you know, the section I was quoting from is actually for the non-residential buildings. So there might be a separate description for.
So how are we communicating this at this time?
We're taking some notes.
We can summarize what we've heard, if that helps, or if you want to endorse the strollers and rollers, we can forward that on to the Planning and Zoning Commission.
I think we've taken those concepts and, worked with them and changed them around, that I don't think it would specifically take the raw recommendation from strollers and rollers and forward that on, but based on how we've discussed it.
Yeah, it would be nice to make sure that we didn't overlook anything
Sure, we can,
from strollers and
we
rollers.
can share their input, certainly.
So forward the input from the strollers and rollers. What the notes I have of kind of the themes that you've discussed, in kind of the order you've discussed them with respect to the bike lockers, and not to name a specific vendor, but to have some language that refers to commonly accessible bike lockers. Enclosed and secure, readily accessible from the street.
Think about the word accessible, we're gonna.
And fine tuning, maybe using a little different word so that it doesn't get confused with disabled access. Clarifying the what's probably a typo about the bicycle rack space versus the bicycle rack. Add the Berkeley
Use the
example of long-term parking.
And the idea of this being in parking design guidelines?
Oh, yeah,
Is
greater
that-
parking.
Yeah.
Okay.
Also, include the word, instead of interior, oh, you already said that, instead of interior use, secured and protected from,
From the elements.
from the elements, yeah. And the portion from the state,
From the state green, yeah, I'll forward that.
green
Green building standards.
green
code.
building standards.
Okay, so shall we ask?
Well, and Harry, you had something about the specific requirement for square footage.
I think
No, I
that
think-
was included in what you said.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
Yeah, we include.
Yeah.
That was the complication about the word accessible. So can we ask our strollers and rollers representative in the audience if there's any, if that covers the topics that you wanted to cover in your comments, or is there anything that we've overlooked?
Other than there's a way to.
Can you go to the mic so it's on the record?
In addition to, if there's a way to have a certain level of remodel cause
Trigger
bicycle
some
parking to kick in.
requirements.
That would be something.
Yeah.
Like, for example, on Kains, was the 900 block of Kains on probably 920 something on the even side, they remodeled a house into a 3-unit, and so I know that every resident there has bicycles, and they've got kids and stuff, and they've got secure bike parking in their garage, so that's excellent in that, so something like that.
So basically, work on a threshold of certain level of development. So,
Is that sufficient, or do you need it in?
It would be, I think it would be good for you to vote on this just so that we can convey that this is
All right.
formal support of the Traffic and Safety
Oh.
Commission.
I move to endorse the group of comments that we've just been discussing.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? None opposed. Thank you. Item 6.3, review proposed policy for implementation of restrictions on street parking near intersections.
So this is a first draft of a policy, not expecting you necessarily to take any action on this tonight, but to give some preliminary feedback. As you know, on a case-by-case basis now, we've brought you a few intersections or a few roadways that we've received public comments about concern about safety for pedestrians crossing the intersections, and the fact that parked cars right at the corners create a visual barrier, make it so hard for the motorist to see the pedestrian or bicyclist. We can continue to do those kind of one-off, but feel like it would be better to have a written policy kind of along, as to somewhat along the lines of the traffic calming policy, just so that we know what we're looking at when these things come up, and also some prioritization criteria, so that we make sure that when we're doing these things, we're doing them and spending money and in some cases doing things that people are unhappy with, that we have good established parameters that we're acting on. So what we have here is that basically to require at standard perpendicular intersections that parking be prohibited within a range of 15 to 20 feet from the edge of the marked or unmarked crosswalk, We're asking for some flexibility because we'd like to be able to save a parking space if it's a matter of just a few feet. So if it's, let's say there's 40 feet from the crosswalk to a driveway, we can have one good-sized parking space and then the 20 feet for visual clearance for the pedestrian. But if it's only 35 feet, we'd like to be able to keep that parking space and then just have 15 feet. We just think that's a potential compromise. You would see these still, but we just want to have a policy in place so that we're kind of being consistent in how we're applying these things. And then on the departure side, a little bit less important, but still important to have some visibility there, and proposing 7 to 10 feet. Then there are some unique intersections where either the topography or the angles are such that there may be a bigger issue that we need more room, or there may not be an issue at all, and we really don't need to worry about red zoning at the intersection. And so we'd like to have a little bit of flexibility built into the program so that we can use good professional judgment. In terms of prioritization, focusing in first on the pedestrian network that's identified in the active transportation plan, and then noting particular school routes, transit stops, just major pedestrian destinations, and then kind of the catch-all of other circumstances, whether you get citizen reports or we have some collisions where we feel like we need to do something about it right away. We have a little bit of flexibility. And then finally, with respect to public notice, we'd like to kind of establish a formal practice on when and what we notice, and this would be a 10-day notice for properties and occupants within 100 feet of where the red zone would be. And those would probably be the people most regularly, most directly impacted by the potential loss of a parking space. So again, we're looking for your comments and suggestions. This is the first draft, and we can work on this over the next few months if necessary. Be happy to answer any questions.
In the example you gave about when you might want some flexibility in order to preserve an existing parking space, the numbers that you used were that in the flexible case, you would want to reduce the red zone length on the approach to 15 feet instead of 20, but 15 to 20 feet is already the range that's proposed here. So would it be correct that when you ask for flexibility, you might want to reduce it to 14 or 13 feet in some cases? Is that what you mean by in number 3 in the numbered list? Yeah. You say it may be reduced from the recommended distance. I think what that means is that in some cases when it's recommended to be 15 to 20 feet, you might have only 14 or 13 in order to preserve a parking space. Is that in fact?
Well, there's kind of two things, and maybe this isn't very artfully written, but there are kind of two areas of flexibility. One, a kind of a conventional minimum parallel parking space is 20 feet. If you look up in the standards, 24 is preferred. But as a practical matter, people can park in a 16 or 17-foot space just fine in this town. People do it all the time. So that's one area of flexibility, to be able to call 17 feet a parking space. And then the other part is, instead of, if we can reduce it to 15 feet, if we decide we're going to do an intersection, we might as well do, I would think we want to do 15 at least.
So if we're going to touch it, it won't go lower. If we're going to touch the intersection, we won't go lower than 15 feet. But this parking space might be deemed okay to be at 17.
Right.
Okay.
Now, the California technical guidance, the Manual for Uniform Traffic Control Devices, they call for, if you mark the parking spaces, they call for a 20-foot minimum no parking zone. But we don't mark parking spaces in most cases. So we're asking for a little bit more flexibility, but not too much more.
Yeah. But I guess the way I read number 3 was that the recommended distance is 15 to 20 feet on the approach and 7 to 10 on the departure, but that in point number 3, you're asking for flexibility to reduce below that recommended distance. And I think from what you're saying, you're not actually asking for that much flexibility.
That's right.
Okay, so when
That's an editorial, I'm sorry, that
So
was.
we can eliminate that.
Yeah, maybe we just eliminate number 3.
well, I guess I'm getting beyond questions now, so
We're eliminating that.
let's talk about that in a minute, but are there other questions?
The public engagement, is that different in any way than what we currently do on the case-by-case basis?
We're kind of ad hoc about it, and that makes me nervous, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I'd like to be consistent in how we do it.
Okay.
And we try to be, we try to be thoughtful about it, but sometimes it makes sense to do more, sometimes we don't do as much. But I'd just rather be, like in the planning and zoning world, it's 300 feet, period. Doesn't matter whether it makes sense or not. And, we can always do more if we think there's obviously some condition, but I think as a minimum, we should, it just imposes discipline on ourselves, basically, to do a notice of 100 feet in 10 days.
But the ones that we've done, if it's because it's a corridor, it's the whole corridor in half of the block intersecting, which sometimes is more than 100 feet.
Right. And so doing a lot more blows up our postage budget also. We spend thousands and thousands of dollars on these things. We don't I'm not necessarily proposing that we do only corridor projects.
Yeah, just
I think-
intersection isolated.
I think it's kind of shifting from a corridor approach to well, there may be a corridor if a roadway is a part of the pedestrian priority network, but it doesn't have to be. For example, you received some public comment a meeting or two ago from a woman on Marin and
Right.
Peralta, was it?
Right.
Ramona,
Or Ramona?
Ramona, yeah.
yeah, Ramona.
And I would see that as just kind of a one-off. We don't need to do that whole corridor to respond to
yeah.
that particular situation.
Well,
Well, we did.
Marine Avenue is a difficult, yeah.
We talked about that whole corridor, right? I mean, that was the, I understand what you're saying, though. Like, so we think about this, we've talked about this as things come up, but then we decide, or it's decided what scope, how long of the whole street or the corridor or whatever. I guess we don't know.
Are we getting too far into discussion with them right now?
So the question is, when we make these decisions, like, how do we know the budget of what we're doing? So that, I guess, that's the part that I'm a little confused about.
Right, and there's that evolves constantly. It's both budget and capacity to do
Right.
these things.
Well, yeah, labor and
Yeah.
money, yeah.
For the most part, this will be our maintenance staff doing it, and it just, kind of depends on what they have the time to do.
But this doesn't talk about the quantity anyway. This is more giving some parameters to when these come up and we address them, it gives some kind of rules and structure to how we do that.
Exactly. And you can take it anywhere you want. We're not trying to guide it in particular way. This was just the first draft.
When I looked at it, the only other thing that I think about is if we bring up these intersections and talk about them, should we be also asking questions around lighting or make?
No, I mean,
No.
I mean, at this point, I don't
Yeah.
think so. I
Holding
think we
it
should-
just
yeah.
to the parking? Okay.
Otherwise, it will never get to.
It will never, and separately, we want to do, I don't know how we're going to find the time to do it, but we want to do a street lighting master plan
Okay.
for the city.
Okay. Good. Questions?
I have actually kind of a tangential question, and you could decide not to entertain it or not. Public Works has begun or began replacing the painted drains to the bay designation, which they had previously put on drain grates, and they replaced it with a medallion, a metal medallion, and they've been painting the curb at the drain grate red, regardless of where it's located in a block. And we haven't had anybody come to us yet that I remember, but I'm expecting it.
Yeah.
A little
I've done it.
5 foot.
I don't come in.
Sometimes it's 2.5 feet. It's however wide the grate is. And sometimes it's in the middle of a parking space, and normally it would be obscured by a car,
Which is why it's red.
which is why it's red. And I understand, ideally, it would be nice on stormy days for nobody to park there. But how do you enforce that? Anyway,
So are you saying that it's painted red in order to make it a no parking zone, or that they just painted it red for aesthetic reasons and it accidentally turned into
To
a no
access it, to
To avoid
declog the
parking.
drain when
It
it's.
really is meant to
storming.
be a no parking zone.
Yeah.
but they're isolated and they're not surrounded by no parking.
So people don't understand that there are no parking zones. Okay.
So that's outside the scope of this particular.
I think it's outside the scope of this particular property, this particular issue that we're trying to address in terms of pedestrian safety. And, yeah, there is a trade-off between being able to get to readily access a storm drain in a storm event and be able to clean it out before there's flooding damage. And I think that's what they were trying to do. But there was obviously a consequence that in some cases we lose a parking space. I do think that's a separate policy with respect to how we manage our storm drain system more than how we manage intersections.
I haven't remembered to raise that, and I wanted to raise it in some form. I expect somebody's going to come in and complain at some point, or
Once they get a ticket.
if they get a ticket.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm not sure how you would find the red curbed ticket behind the car. You'd have to know it was there. So, right, I'm sorry. We're not discussing it.
Did you have any other questions? Pertinent to intersections.
Actually,
not lighting
I think
and
this is pretty well written. It seems flexible enough to encompass both intersections and corridors. So staff can proceed as is convenient and appropriate, which is great. It sets up a
We
standard.
haven't had public
Yeah.
comments.
Oh,
Any
right.
other questions? Any questions from the public? Yep, please.
This might be, of course it does, Jeff, but just to confirm that pedestrian crossings will always also include the multi-use paths, and if there are any other, I don't know, in the future, if there are other multi-use paths that happen when the Bay Trail is extended, just confirming that pedestrian crossing also means active transportation crossing or multi-use path crossing, because it's important that cyclists are able to see the drivers on cross streets and vice versa too. So that's the only comment. Thanks.
Thank you.
The Albany Greenway crossings is also a good example.
So can I finish my phrase?
Yeah.
I think this also provides enough support for us when people come to us and complain about their particular instance, that it's not just them.
You mean if people don't want the red zone painted in their neighborhood, we can say,
Right.
but we have a policy. Yeah.
And we're fairly consistent about it, yeah.
If you recall, there was one on Posen a year or so ago where the neighborhood was very upset about it.
There was one much more recently than that.
Oh, yeah, and that was Garfield.
Garfield, yeah.
Yeah.
But the one on Posen was a situation where, it's close to a school. It was something that sooner or later, I think we feel like we need to bring back to you again. That there are enough hazardous issues in that particular intersection, it really needs attention.
Or way in
Oh,
Posen.
yeah.
So I'd like to move that the Traffic and Safety Commission expresses support for the proposed policy.
I'd like to second that, sorry.
I have more comments, though, if you don't mind.
Sorry.
Can we just
Please.
Yeah, I had a comment.
put that motion off for a bit?
Yes.
So First, I'd like to address Amy's point about intersections between streets and paths, because the language under proposed requirements specifically says perpendicular intersection between local and/or collector streets. Does that, in some technical way, already include an intersection between a street and a path? Because to my untrained eye, it looks like it's not including.
This may be a different policy question because I have taken to treating paths as streets. So for the purpose of doing a stop sign warrant or traffic control strategy, I look at the automobile street and the bicycle street that intersect, figure out which one's got more traffic, put a stop sign on the other one or a yield sign on the other one. So not to throw this into a whole different realm, but I think at the core of it for me, it's a question of how do you define a mixed-use pathway? Because I look at, for example, where the Albany Greenway intersects Gilman and Curtis in Berkeley as a six-leg intersection.
Yeah.
There's stop signs on all six approaches. It's most people only see four of the legs because the other two are paths. But because for me, how would we convert this so that the path approaching the intersection has good visibility? Not just that the path is visible for cars, but what's the visibility for the path approaching?
Well, I think we all agree that we want to apply the same standards to the intersection of a street and a path that we would apply to the intersection of two streets. My question is, does the language under the proposed requirements here express that clearly enough? And I think to a layperson, it does not really express that. Maybe if it's a policy that's going to be used by staff and discussed here at the commission, where we understand that streets includes the Ohlone Greenway and the Bay Trail and whatever else.
No, we have to add the multi-use paths.
We could add that. I think in reality, probably, we certainly want those intersections red zone, but they may require a separate technical analysis. I'm not visualizing where there's an issue right now where we don't have a red zone, but.
Yeah, I mean, I would think we would want to use the same distances.
Well, we might want to do more.
Maybe, but
Maybe
at
we
least
should
as a
say-
starting point.
Maybe we should say there that it should be an analysis of visibility triangles. I think that's what we need there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, I guess one idea is to include that under number 4, under the
Yeah.
unique angle of approach or topography,
Or
or
add a
involving
5.
multi-use paths,
Or add a 5 specifically for visibility triangles
Yeah.
between street and multi-use paths.
so then all of those would be considered unique cases that.
Unique
But
cases,
I don't know if that's really necessary. I would think just, at least as a starting point, to say under number 1 and number 2, between local and/or collector streets and/or paths.
Oh, could
Yeah,
be.
I
that's
think
a simple
I
enough.
think that would probably address Amy's concern, I think, and it certainly address my understanding of Amy's concern.
And between streets and a intersection.
In between local and/or collector streets and/or multi-use and/or paths. Because whether it's a pedestrian path or a multi-use path, the same going to apply.
Do we have any red zones for paths now?
Yeah, we have some between the Albany Greenway and the intersecting streets. Not all of the intersections are red, but some are.
And, yeah.
Brighton is a good example of an intersection where the Greenway has a lot of red around it. There's no parking basically under the BART tracks there, I think.
Or Dartmouth
But-
doesn't have any.
And at least now that we've improved it, the Ohlone Greenway crosses streets in the same place where Masonic Avenue crosses them.
Well,
So,
closer to,
yeah, so I don't think we have a situation where there's a path all by itself away from a automobile intersection. We used to, and those were terrible.
Some
problems that we-
Broadway and Peralta, we've got forgetting the name.
Oh,
of
the Manor
walking
Way.
path, Manor Way. thank
Manor
you.
Way, yeah.
On
Yeah, that's a good
Washington-
example.
On Washington, Christina's
That's
Law.
true.
Yeah, okay.
I
We got a
can't
couple.
think that that's,
Both of those, well, I think Manor Way has raised crosswalk,
Yeah.
and Christina's Way is also going to have a raised
But
crosswalk.
Manor Way, I don't think has the red zones that.
No, it does have a raised, it's a raised crosswalk.
But I think that fits the marked or unmarked crosswalk
Yeah.
criteria, but I think, as you said, adding or path
Yeah.
to the intersection descriptions should take care of it.
We don't want to eliminate parking.
No parking anywhere.
And then I would like to
That'll be popular.
go back to the question about number 3 and whether we should just take that out altogether?
Yeah.
Or whether there is some, are you looking for more flexibility beyond what's expressed in number 1 and 2? And if you're not, then
do you want to
let's
call
just leave
out
it at
the
that.
flexibility of the parking space? The interpretation of what a parking,
The sound is off, and
I
it's.
I think, well, what we have here is confusing, so definitely want to fix it. I think it's, I think we can live without it,
Yeah, I
because
mean,
we're not marking the parking spaces, and
no.
it's just kind of using,
I mean, you're going to use your notion of where you think cars are going to park in order to decide whether in a given
Where the-
circumstance you use 15 feet or
Right.
20 feet or something in between.
right.
Do you
But you
want,
don't need the policy to tell you how to do that. You can figure out how to do
That's
that.
right, I think we can kind of,
do you want the flexibility the converse way? So if you have 21 or 22 feet to a curb cut from the intersection, you're not just going to paint 20 feet and leave two feet of gray curb, right? You're going to go 22 feet all the way. And I don't know if that's implied or if you want that to be explicit, but it seems like there's going to be situations, a lot of them probably, where you're going to go all the way to the nearest curb cut.
Well, that's what we've been doing on Washington Avenue, for instance. There's like 21 foot.
Right, so just
I'm
go
not
all the
going to
way.
leave the 1 foot there.
Right. So I don't know if that needs to be explicit or
So
not.
do you want the policy to give you explicit permission to do that, or does that just come along for the ride?
I think where it probably is a good idea to red zone is if you were leaving like 12 feet or something that somebody might be tempted to try to park in.
Didn't we make small car parking spot
Or
ones?
or moped?
Yeah,
or-
but compact is 15.
Oh,
in
is
length,
it?
so,
Okay,
yeah.
I just remember
Nothing
a
less
short
than
one we
And,
made
and,
once.
people with big cars park in compact spots all the time
Really?
anyhow, so it's kind of,
It might be tricky on some points of 12 foot.
yeah,
12
so
foot.
I think that might be good to be able to extend the red zone all the way to the next driveway.
Or decrease it to 15 and then leave the 12 foot whatever with 5 more feet, things like that. But I think it's addressed.
So
Here.
the policy right now gives you the leeway to paint between 15 and 20 feet of red curb.
Why don't we-
Maybe instead of saying you might paint less red than that, you want to say you might paint more red than that if the,
Well, and the
The remainder
MUT,
if the
area is not.
remainder to the next curb cut is insufficient for a parking space.
Right.
And of course, all of that would be at your discretion, at staff's discretion, not explained, and the policy doesn't need to explain in detail how you decide that.
Right, but, well, maybe we can, this is a process question perhaps. I'm presuming that
Bring it
you will
back.
want to, you, the commission, will want to see these.
The
Yes.
final one, yeah. Maybe next month or.
Yeah, but we don't
So
need
you
to
mean
see
see the
each case.
cases?
See the cases.
I think
I don't
we
think so. I
assume
think-
we see the cases, no?
But we have to have public notice and
Yeah.
everything, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
okay.
written around
there's public
us.
notice.
We've written
We're gonna
around
see it.
you.
Yeah.
But if if the ATP and MUTCD say 30 feet, why can't we just say 15 to 30 feet? Why don't we just, because that would,
Because, well, I'm going to add that. The 30 foot before, 30 foot is, well, the ATP said 30 feet. I think based on the previous MUTCD. And the MUTCD, the national version says 30 feet before a signalized intersection only. And that's, but the California one eliminated that 30 feet requirement. Also, the other reason not to use 30 feet is that we don't want to eliminate more space, more parking spaces. So we know that everybody likes their parking spaces, so.
Right, but if we're stating a range, and we fall on the lower
in order
side
to
of the
add
range,
more
that's, but the range gives you the ability to have that, grab the extra foot or two. I mean,
That's,
I mean,
I think what Susan's suggesting is that if you make if you have a higher end to the high end of the range, then you don't need extra language
Right.
authorizing you to
That's
make
right.
it longer when
That's
you want,
right.
when you don't
That's a
have
good
enough
point.
left for parking space.
and it's in keeping with what's
Yeah.
been suggested, I mean, we're already, we've,
that's a good point.
as a group, we've kind of said that we're comfortable with 20.
15 and
but-
30, yeah. I think it's a good point. Any comments?
And I guess the only question is, we're obviously talking about minimums. So one approach would just say minimum of 15 to 20 feet or 15 to 30 feet, whichever one I want to go with. The public is, based on our experience, more often than not going to come in and say, go with the smallest possible number. So the 15 is the only number they're going to see. And the bigger the difference between the 15 and whatever our upper limit of the minimum is, the more likely they are to adhere to the 15, and it's harder for us to go to a bigger number. So I don't know. It's a little bit of a psychological game, and that makes it hard to pin down what I think really is the best way to approach it, because I totally see the value in what you're saying, and we can absolutely go that way. But will it be easier to get 20 feet if that's part of the range? And I really don't know. That's the only thing that gives me any pause.
I think if you go minimums, you're going to get minimum every single time, though, right? That's
Yeah.
what pretty much. So I don't know if there's cases where we want more than that, which there probably are.
Well, it sounds like there are, because it sounds like what in reality, when you go in and we say 15, but there's only 2 feet allowed, there's only 2 feet and not enough for a space, then it needs to go 17 feet. I don't know how often that happens, though, and so the range,
Very
I think it's pretty common.
Yeah, so if we just say 15 feet is the hard minimum, and it's going to be 15 or more, I don't think there's a point in calling an upper bound to that.
I
Yeah,
live with
I
that.
mean, unless
No,
it's something.
no range then, 15,
at least 15.
at least
At least
15.
Yeah.
15, that's simpler.
But I-
Much better.
On the other, to promote the other side of this,
Right.
I think we may come into these designs preferring 20 feet
Correct.
as our starting point, and then we can reduce it to 15 in cases where the 20 feet would eliminate a whole parking space, and we can regain that by reducing to 15. But
Right.
if we had if we were just the safety commission, we would go with 20.
Sure,
If we were not trying to accommodate people's need to park, we would
sure.
want to start with 20. So that's why I think saying 15 to 20 expresses that 20 is our goal, 15 is how low we're willing to go to preserve parking when
I'm okay with
needed.
that, because it doesn't actually lose us anything. We still have our minimum, and we can kind of say, hey, look, it could have been worse. We could have gone 20.
Yeah. But then I think we do need the language that authorizes staff to make it more than 20 when there's simply not enough space for a parking space in the remaining.
I think that's important. We get a lot of calls about people trying to park in 12, 13 feet between two driveways, and
Yeah.
Or encroaching into the driveway.
they end up encroaching the driveway.
So just leave it like a minimum then? I mean, I don't understand.
I think we came back around to how you've written it.
How
Okay,
you've
so
written it
basically
with
this
the
is-
addition.
With,
that-
with the addition of the ability to extend it a little bit if where necessary, past
So, okay,
20
on the
feet.
approach side of standard perpendicular intersection between local streets or collector street and, or paths.
And/or paths.
Right.
Yes,
On-street parking shall be prohibited for a distance of between, or for a minimum of 15,
Minimum.
minimum of 15.
No, I was suggesting that we leave it a distance of between 15 and 20.
Okay. That's fine. And then we add the clause
And then, so then that takes care of number 1 and 2. And then number 3, instead of saying the parking restricted area may be reduced, say the parking restricted area may be increased beyond the recommended maximum in cases where the remaining space is insufficient.
Beyond the
for-
minimum.
Beyond the minimum.
Yeah, I wouldn't use the word maximum. I mean, the 15 to 20 is still our minimum.
Well, 20 is,
So it's like a minimum range?
yeah,
Yeah.
15 to 20 is the range, 15 is the minimum, 20 is the maximum.
Right,
But in some cases, we may paint a red zone longer than 20 feet.
sure.
That's why I said maybe
I just wouldn't use
Increased
the word
beyond-
maximum.
beyond the max.
Because the maximum is really, we could red curve the whole block.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so the length of the parking restricted area may be increased,
Beyond the minimum in cases where?
I wouldn't say beyond the minimum.
Beyond 20 feet,
Beyond
Well-
20 feet,
Beyond 20 feet?
where,
in cases where the remaining space is insufficient to provide a full parking stall.
I wouldn't say beyond 20 feet, because then you have to have a separate case for number 2 to say beyond 10 feet. It's too, it's tying you into too much detail.
Beyond
I
what?
tried to make it simple.
How about if we could?
Why don't you wordsmith this?
We can catch the drift. We'll bring something back.
Also, only parking restricted area might be increased in cases, so
Yeah.
nothing.
Yeah,
That's what I
In
would
cases
say.
where the remaining space is whatever.
I had one more.
And we'll also look to make sure that this, we need to do a little legal research to see whether this needs to be adopted as an ordinance in order to enforce it.
I think we should.
We may want to do that.
I think there's some more comments.
Yeah, one more comment. Bus stops, I think we would, transit at least, the preference would be not to have a parking space in front of or behind the bus stop at an intersection. I don't know if Albany has any, but El Cerrito does. El Cerrito does have locations where you'll have a parked car and then a bus stop.
Yeah, we do have, you don't want to have it also behind, isn't it?
I think it's both, right? So
Yeah,
it's-
we have one at the Solano San Pablo intersection is immediately before the. So okay, so I'm telling you that because
Oh,
when we
I see.
observed the
Yeah.
taper, it couldn't because of the parking spaces.
Mm-hmm.
The bus could not go into the next to the curb, and then the tail stuck out most of the time
Right.
because of the cars were
Right.
parked there. And then it's fun, they actually basically obstruct the taper that the bus needs.
But that is, just means that the red zone that's allocated for the bus stop is
Insufficient.
not long enough.
Yeah, but there are situations where, I believe in El Cerrito, where you have single parked car on the departure of an intersection, then you'll have bus stop. So it makes it very challenging.
So the
'cause-
bus stop isn't even adjacent to the intersection.
Well, it's 20 feet or something like that.
Right, but there's a parked car between the intersection and the bus
right.
stop.
And that's a condition that is not good for transit.
We should
'cause
really,
it's-
Yeah.
Makes it very inaccessible.
Now that we're doing the
Yeah.
San Pablo.
In drafting this, we weren't really envisioning San Pablo or Solano as much as
Right.
some of the other intersections.
But if it's
And it has a different intent, for sure.
Yeah, but we didn't want to completely ignore the fact that that's, there may be in the future other stops someplace.
Also, we can
And-
add it as a policy in commercial areas.
And the purpose of these guidelines is to provide a structure to implementation of the crosswalk safety
Right.
policy. So I think if there is a problem with bus stops, we should bring it up in a separate document.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know if this is the right document. or
Well,
not.
remember that a couple of meetings ago, you suggested, when we were talking about the work plan, that we work with AC Transit staff to develop a transit policy or something
Yes.
like that. So we can
Yes.
actually include it there.
Yeah. Okay.
I wanted to ask about the 100 feet radius for notifications. How many houses is 100 feet?
Probably about three.
Two,
Two or
three
three.
houses. I guess
It depends on the front end.
my inclination would be to go a little longer than that along the street and not to like go in across the backyard into the next house on a different street. So
kind of
I mean, maybe the 100 feet is fine, but I would think that some more neighbors longitudinally along the street that's being painted would want to know, whereas neighbors on other streets who may also be within 150 feet or whatever wouldn't care so much.
So we're kind of an oval-shaped,
That's what I would imagine, but or more like a kind of a clover shaped
You
around the
you
intersection.
came to the 100 feet, how? I mean, is that a common number you use for other things?
well, it's, yes, and it deals with part of that issue in that 95% of the residential lots in town, or in any of the lots, are 100 feet in depth. So when you say 100 feet, you're avoiding that next block
Avoiding
over.
getting, yeah, I understand that you don't want to make a radius that's big enough to get you to the next block.
But we could, and you would get, from the end of the red zone, 100 feet would get you at least 2 houses, and in most cases, 3 or 4.
Okay.
So you don't capture anything on the other side of the street?
No, that would be, it would be on the, well, if we're doing the whole intersection, it would be the same. But if we're only doing one side of the street, yeah, it would be 3 or 4 on one side and then probably 1 or 2 on the other side of the street.
What do we want to do only one side, Jeff? I mean,
Well, just in the minimum
Don't we
situation.
typically
the four
see the
legs.
floor?
Yeah.
I think we
That's
should do
usually
four
how
legs.
we look at them now.
Normally, but if there was a circumstance for some reason where you were just, like maybe 3 of the legs were already painted and you were only going to add
it's a
paint
T
to one of
intersection.
them or something.
a T intersection might, it is, but.
But
So-
even then, we've had people from the other side of the street come for the discussion, so I don't.
Yeah, I mean, but I guess my question is if it includes 3 or 4 houses along the side being painted and maybe 1 or 2 along the other side of the same street, is that, do we feel that that's enough to cover the neighbors who would likely care about this? Or, and I don't have a strong opinion, I just wanted to.
I'm
the
comfortable with the 100 feet. If all the neighbors within that 100 feet feel really strongly, they're going to try to bring their
Yeah, they can
adjacent
certainly
neighbors as
bring
well.
their-
So we're not saying you can't comment because you're too
Right.
far away, but we would at least provide notice to the first 100 feet.
Is that what you did the time before? I mean, is it consistent with what we've done before?
No,
We
I think
did-
we've done a little bit
We've done
more,
more,
actually.
we've done more,
Well,
But
that
it's
was when
been
you-
ad hoc, and so that's what makes me uncomfortable, is that we don't have a consistent way of doing it.
Wasn't it more because you did a whole street, though? And did the 100 feet?
No, because everything is at intersection, you know, usually the Washington Avenue and Portland blocks that are east-west, oriented east-west, are shorter than the ones that are north-south. So,
Yeah.
Another way of doing this would be, say, 150 feet walking distance. So it's
Just
not
this
the hard
rectangular.
radius.
Right, because where people park is determined by how
far they have to
how
walk.
far they have to walk to their house. That's a good idea.
So with 150, we get more, we get
You
that
get
clover
more,
leaf
you get more
shaped.
people along the street
Yeah.
and not have
And-
to worry about the.
actually,
the
and
next
that's
street
what we've been doing, is walking distance, not radius.
Yeah.
Because the other side doesn't really care sometimes.
Good. So 150 feet walking distance?
Walking
is that-
distance?
Is that
Yeah, we
meet all of
can,
our?
we can figure that out.
Good.
Okay.
So now I'll move that we approve development of the policy, given the input provided by the Traffic and Safety Commission.
And then you said, who said it?
I seconded it before.
Would you like to see the final form or you're ready to? We're happy to.
I think we should see it. I don't think we'll need to.
Bring it back for
spend
information, I
half an hour.
Well,
guess.
you should have a copy of it, so you know what
Yeah.
you're implementing. We'll bring you the final copy, and if for some reason there's something that needs to be fixed, you can,
And you will let us know if it's something that has to,
and we'll let you, if it does, if it ends up being, needing to be an ordinance in order to be enforced, for the tickets to be enforced, then we'll obviously let you know about that.
Okay.
Great.
So do we need a motion, or are we just,
I think you have the motion in a second, you need to vote.
All in favor, say aye.
aye?
Aye.
All opposed? None opposed. All right. I'm getting myself confused. 6.4, speed and volume surveys for 600 block of Kains and the 1,000 block of Kains.
So we received 2 requests here at the commission meeting, maybe 3 months ago, about the speed survey on the 1,000 block of Kains and the 600 block of Kains. So we provided some summaries there that in both cases, we are within the threshold in the 85th percentile speeds. For instance, the 600 block of Kains is 25.7 miles per hour, and the 1,000 block of Kains is a little bit higher at 26.8. Now, the 1,000 block of Kains is a two-way intersection. Corridor. The from 900 to El Cerrito city limit is one way only. Kains. So
You mean the,
there has been, Ed Fields actually provided, requested the raw data, and he did some calculations by hour. So by hour, he actually sent me today the calculation that during the peak hour, the 85th percentile is a little bit higher. So, and also the volumes are higher because San Pablo Avenue and I-80 are completely congested, so people try to look for the easier way out. So that's very natural and normal to occur. It's very difficult not to say, okay, here, you cannot enter this street at this point, because there are some signages that said, okay, no, do not use Adams or Kains between these hours, but you can, who can enforce that, or something like that? So that would be completely bad.
Well, we've been struggling for years with the goal of reducing cut-through traffic, but nobody's ever been able to define what that is well enough to try.
Well, Berkeley has the barrier, so it's just like...
It still doesn't define what the cut-through traffic is.
So we conducted those, and we have also some collisions in the, basically on the 600 block, there's no collisions in the last 2 years, in 2 years that we have data for, between 2014 and 16, or near the intersection of the 600 block. But on the 1,000 block of Kains, we have, let's see, 4 minor injury collisions were reported in the vicinity of the intersection of Marine and Kains, including 1 pedestrian and automobile collision at the crosswalk, and 1 minor injury collision of 2 vehicles at the intersection of Kains and Dartmouth. So those are the collisions reported near the 1,000 block of Kains. Kains and Dartmouth and Kains and Marine. And most of them are a violation of right-of-way. Now, Kains and Marine is a very challenging intersection, particularly because depending on the time of the day also, it's almost difficult to cross there. So most of these collisions are a violation of right-of-way, which is natural.
That intersection is going to look somewhat different after phase 3, right?
Yeah, so.
Yeah. We'll take care of one of the biggest problems by taking the utility poles out of there, because right now, eastbound pedestrian standing waiting to cross is hidden behind the pole. I've had to stop my bike and, scoot out in the lane to get cars behind me to stop so a pedestrian can cross, which is kind of ridiculous, but anyway.
The
so
poles
it'll
will
change.
remove hopefully by the end of next year, so
Which would be great.
that's another. Huh? Next year. Well, the conduits and the electrical work is first, and then the poles remain for about a year.
Item
it's a lot, yeah.
6.6. We'll get there.
Yes, it's coming.
Yeah. Slowly but surely. So we started this project in 2012. Actually,
Item
the district,
6.6.
yeah, the district was created in 2000, in the year 2010. Oh, 6.6 is.
We're on item 6.4,
Getting ahead of ourselves.
speed and volume surveys.
Oh,
All
okay.
right.
Okay.
Yeah, I lost myself. Okay, so, so we're just,
No, I was saying,
Receiving
yeah.
the
So, yeah,
report.
there's no recommendation for a change.
so this, yeah, okay. Okay, good.
At this point, no. I mean, we can, after the, maybe on the 1,000 block, after the implementation of the undergrounding and the phase 3, we can monitor again.
Measure it again,
Yeah.
okay?
Can I ask more about the time-sensitive data that Ed Fields calculated? Did he find that the speed, the 85th percentile speed, or the volume during those extrapolated from those time periods was enough to qualify for treatments? Or
No.
Still not enough?
Still no. It's higher than the overall 85th percentile, but it was, I think, the threshold of soft measures, about 28.
28, yeah.
Yeah.
But so the 85th percentile was still below 28, even at the particular times of day
Yeah.
he was concerned about? Okay.
The reason, I just need to corroborate. I mean, he sent me the email today.
Right,
so.
but he wasn't asserting that the
No, he said
the
that he
85th
would not be
percentile
able
got to be over 28.
yeah, he would not be able to attend the meeting, and then indeed, during the peak hours, there's more volume and the speeds are a bit faster, which it's hard to understand sometimes because more volume is less speeds, but
Well, it's not enough volume for congestion. The speeds are still high. I mean, that is kind of the hallmark of the cut-through traffic behavior. There's more volume because people are cutting through because they're in a hurry, so they drive faster.
right, so,
The other thing that we kind of worry about on those and why we use the 85th percentile is once you get to the traffic that's going above the 85th percentile speed, they're less susceptible to correction by most traffic calming measures. They're the ones who'll just floor it between speed humps or other things like that. So we're not, at that point, targeting the people who are going to react the way we want. So it becomes a wasted effort, unfortunately.
Well, I did want to make one other observation, but if there's public comment, we could have that first.
Is there any public comment? Okay.
I just wanted to point out that the collisions that were mentioned were at the intersections, and presumably those are places where the traffic on Kains was moving slowly.
At a
There are
stop sign?
stop signs at both ends. So
yeah.
those collisions would, I mean, they may be problems that we would want to address, but they're not problems of excess speeding.
Yeah.
No, it's basically right-of-way violations, people trying to turn or cross Marine Avenue or Dartmouth. Dartmouth, it is, well, from what I could gather, it was not, it's a calmer street, but I guess people, I know that's visibility or
The
something.
sight lines aren't very good at Dartmouth.
Yeah, and my
The sight
experience
lines, so
is,
that's what
Narrow
I'm
street,
saying.
yeah.
my
parked,
experience
heavily
with
parked.
Dartmouth is that many people on the cross streets think they can just cross Dartmouth.
Yeah,
They
so
don't think
that's-
that there's any traffic on it. So.
Right, and also the
So they just-
visibility on Dartmouth is not great, as you said, that's right.
So
So,
the center island has gone in on San Pablo to prevent left turns onto
Oh,
Dartmouth.
wow.
Traffic volume should drop.
So hopefully that'll reduce the traffic.
It's right in, right out, that intersection, yeah.
And I don't know how I'm going to get home on my bike tonight since I used that left turn since the hawk signal isn't there yet.
You can do what everybody else does right now. You can cross at Monroe and ride on a sidewalk all the way down to Dartmouth. That's what everybody does.
Well, it's allowed now with.
Not on that side of the street.
Or in, not on that side, I mean, no, on the.
I'm being somewhat facetious, but that is what people do.
Yes, I am aware of that.
I'm talking about us riding on the sidewalk on the south side of.
Yes. Between Monroe and, yes, between the development and Buchanan. Yes.
Okay. Well, that's my report.
Thank you. Any other comments? All right. 6.5, report on proposed grant application for electric vehicle charging stations.
And I distributed a table. Claire, the sustainability planner.
I have an extra one.
Yeah, and transportation coordinator, she is preparing a grant application that needs council action, is that right, too? For the installation of electric vehicle charging stations. We have identified 5 locations: the community center, library parking lot, Ocean View parking lot, UC Village multi-use development. We don't have a commitment from the developer yet on that particular location, but we're hoping. City Hall and the Public Works parking lot for a total of 9 parking spots. So this also needs a council approval because we need to provide 25% match. So council has to come up with the source of funds and the amount. They have to approve it. So these are potential locations, and this is going to be taken to council when? They're due in July, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it'll be sometime in, I don't know, we haven't said the precise date yet.
Okay, but yeah. So next year, we're going to be applying again to add the 4 parking locations at the Park and Ride lot. And the West Village might also get a charger. That could be this year or next year. So within UC Village.
And you mentioned it's a 25% match, and what is the estimated?
We're working on that right now, or you have? Yeah, because my understanding is that we're working on not only the charging stations, but the construction cost. Okay. So we're refining that cost, and it could be, something that maybe council has to consider, because it could be 25% is of, let's say, $200,000 or so. It could be, something that we need to think. It's not on our CIP right now, so we need to really look at the source.
Questions?
So the last time we looked at this at charging stations in general, there wasn't really one standard, and it looks like there are 2 different types of chargers on this list.
Yeah, we're trying for instance, the one fast charging station that we're proposing at UC Village. We need to find adequate space for the transformer, because it really requires a different current than what we have available on the street right now. I think it's 240, and the outside space doesn't have that. So inside Sprouts, there's 240, and the transformer is a good size. So we need to really find out if we can have that. Plus, if the developer approves it. Then the other ones are more like a medium charging, medium time charging.
So those would be level 2?
Level 2, yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And is there some standard for paying for this now, or do you join a club or how do you?
Yeah, though there's some vendors that actually have that set up. Claire is working with one vendor for the grant application. Most likely that's going to be the person, the vendor that will be chosen. Or if the grant application, I'm not really familiar with the grant application, but if the grant application requires competitive bid, then that's another story.
Yeah. Will the same system of payment that works at the only other electric station in Albany that I know of, there's one behind the post office in Bossburger on Solano in the back lot. So will the system that operates that be compatible with, I mean, can you
I don't
join
know
one?
that those details, so
Okay.
yet. I don't know. I haven't worked on the grant application. I'm just reporting what Claire, what I know from Claire. And because we're in the same office, I overhear things too.
So the ones on Monroe, are we talking about some of them potentially going on the street, or?
Yeah, it's on the it's on the parking.
Is it
We did a walk-in audit at all of these locations, and they're basically the parking stalls,
Right, the perpendicular stalls.
perpendicular
Okay.
stalls. Yeah.
Great.
So is it the case that any parking space that's equipped with an EV charger is off limits to other parking?
Well, that's what I've seen in the all of the parking electric parking stations, and the requirement is that they should be plugged. Like Walnut Creek, I think, has that. I mean, all the vehicles that are using this parking stall should be connected to the.
So you have to
charging
have an electric car, plug it in, and pay with your card in order to be allowed to park there.
Yeah.
And then is there a time limit? Is that different from our usual time limit for parking in one of these?
Well, depending on, this one should be paid, so you pay for 2 hours, 1 hour, and depending on your level 1 or level 2.
Right. But I mean, if you wanted to leave your car there for 3 hours,
So
I
there's
don't think
different ways. There's different ways to do it, and I think this is kind of a question that we need to figure out what the answer is going to be.
yeah.
For a level 2 charger, you might charge for 4 hours, so maybe 4 hours is an appropriate parking time limit. But the question of, are you going to stay connected to the charger? Certainly, we don't want anyone sitting there parked, not connected to the charger, because we're wasting the space. So we could, for example, one of the things that we did one on street in front of the West Branch Library in Berkeley, and we're putting a parking meter there. So not only are you paying for charging, you're paying for time spent parking. And if we wanted to, we could make that meter be the most expensive meter on the street. Not to punish people who are using the charger, but to say,
Use it just when you need it.
Use it when you need it, and then move so someone else gets to use it. And so maintaining that turnover is really important. The DC fast charger seems likely that we want to set a shorter time limit because you don't need to be there that long.
Yeah.
That's right.
And is the DC fast charger the only one that's in an on-street parking space? The others are all in lots?
What was the question? I'm sorry.
Or is the DC fast charger the only one that's in an on-street parking space?
No,
The others all in lots?
for instance, the community center is in the library parking lot. Ocean View is parking lot. City Hall should be parking lot, and the Public Works parking lot.
So those normally don't have any time restriction? Like in the spaces
we
as they
don't.
are, as they're configured today,
Yeah,
don't
it's
have
true.
any time
Yeah,
restriction?
we don't.
Okay.
And is the
We can put it for the actual charging station.
So we might need to add a time restriction in those.
does the city get any dollar benefit out of the charge cost?
Right now, I don't think it is. We're looking at that. It's just
Not a
basically
revenue center.
it's the revenue that the vendor will get.
But we will be paying a 25% match for
It's because,
construction.
right, because we want to encourage the use of electric vehicles instead of gasoline and reduce our carbon footprint.
Wait, so to piggyback on that, so we'll pay a capital match for a vendor to install the charging stations, and then the vendor is going to make a profit off of the charging station? And are they also going to be responsible for O&M? Is there any maintenance? I assume there is.
Yeah,
With this, and that the city has no responsibility for that?
They should be, I don't know for sure the answer, but they should be responsible for the O&M.
Usually you're going to get, say, 2 years' worth of O&M as part of the purchase contract,
Okay.
but then after that.
Transfers to the city.
Yeah, it's sort of out of warranty, so to speak, and then you may need to have an ongoing contract for the maintenance and operations. So that really all depends on the contract with the vendor.
But yet the vendor would still be making a profit off of the
Yeah,
station?
because the vendor takes care of the processing the financial transactions. For a handful of chargers, the city just doesn't want to get into that business.
Sure.
It's not,
Sure.
it won't pay for us to do that. So it's always easier to use the vendor to provide that service. I don't know
Right.
that it's a huge profit generator.
But wouldn't the city just want to stay out of it altogether?
Those are questions that we need to really find out. Do you know?
I'm sorry, I don't know. I haven't gotten involved in reviewing
But
this.
I'm writing everything down, so I'll ask Claire tomorrow.
Yeah. 'Cause if you were to make it be a privately owned and operated piece of hardware, so we didn't even have to apply for the grant, then we might want to be charging rent or something of that sort.
Right.
Because it's use of public facilities. And so we don't want to just give that away.
Right.
Even though it's achieving a goal that we're interested in.
I think there is, you can argue that there is a public benefit, but I think it's another argument to say that the city is going to be responsible for some of the operating costs. I mean, even some of the capital costs, but I guess you could say that there's some capital costs to just get it going and say there's just public benefit there. But then for it to be ongoing, then the city has some responsibility towards that when there's a vendor that's making some money. That doesn't seem right to me.
So the city shouldn't be. Is that what you're
Yeah, I
saying?
mean, if the vendor's going to be there, then the vendor covers all of the operating.
We could theoretically set up, again, a contract where we get part of the revenue.
Yeah, or that, right? But,
Yeah.
and I don't know if the city is even interested in collecting revenue. I'm sure that's great, but at least we don't want to pay costs, though.
Yeah. So again, some of the ones that we've done in Berkeley, we do get part of the revenue out of that.
Okay.
You don't get revenue
We do.
from the ones that you do in Berkeley? And then the company also, the vendor also?
Yeah, so we put some in our garages. And, you know, in some cases, they're actually paying rent for the space.
Paying rent.
Like City Car Share was paying rent for the space
Right.
and providing the charger. In another situation, we've just got the charger installed and it's open for anyone to use. And we periodically get a check from the vendor for revenues from use of the charger. So it doesn't have to be that we're just giving away all the profit.
Yeah, and I think that's a better arrangement.
So we can put it in the contract when we are ready for implement, I mean, when we are ready to bid and things like that.
And if you want, I can put you in touch with the staff at Berkeley who's done a number of these.
Okay.
So you have some expectation of what the range of arrangements are.
Is there any data on, as the batteries are getting better, how many of these stations are being used? Is occupancy?
They're getting used a fair amount. The one we put on University Avenue in front of the library, I forget the numbers, but it was getting used 3 or 4 times a day, possibly, by the time, you know, people had figured out it was there. So
Well, we have to get the grant first.
yeah,
Otherwise, there's no.
start somewhere.
But if we get the grant, we will bring it back to this commission. Well, the sustainability committee is the one that is leading this.
No, I wouldn't say that. I
Okay.
think because particularly the ones that are in the public right of way, I think it does need to come back to Traffic and Safety Commission.
Right, and then.
But there's only
maybe
one of these locations that's in the public right of way, right?
It's Monroe.
Well, public property, I should say, public property, the
Right.
Ocean
City
View
right away.
Park.
And the
Civic
community,
Center,
the cities.
Community Center.
Well, we can bring really it's interesting to talk to the City of Berkeley staff because you guys have done a lot of them and then you have experience with the contract, so that would be really good.
Well, it also seems to me that, for you correct if I'm wrong, but there's a model there where a vendor comes in and it's turnkey for the vendor, and Berkeley, if anything, is only just collecting a check.
Yeah.
They're not investing in a grant or putting in a local match.
Yeah, we've had to pay installation charges.
You
In some
have?
cases, we got the
Okay.
charger for free, but we had to pay the installation, so that kind of becomes the match.
Okay.
But yeah, as much as you can get towards that turnkey, just come put it here,
Right.
operate it, and we'll provide the space, that's pretty ideal.
Right.
I don't think that's what this one's set up to do, unfortunately. But yeah,
Right.
most of the grants do require you to pay the capital cost, or it just, it's kind of like the way the bike rack thing used to be. You get this much money regardless what the bike rack costs you to install.
Sure.
Okay, well,
So we should probably bring this back to you. You've asked some good questions, and we'll bring it back to you next month.
next month? Okay.
Anything else? No? Okay. Report on city council approved budget adjustments and construction contract award for the Buchanan Marin Utility Undergrounding and Bike Path Phase 3.
Phase 3, yeah. Yeah, the city council approved in May the contract award to Gilotti Construction, and yeah, I think there is a staff report. So we needed additional dollars to actually make it happen in terms of the surface components, the phase 3, and everything that it's going to be on the undergrounding portion is going to be reimbursed by the utility companies. So we've been having meetings with the utility companies and with Gilotti Construction today and next week, and we anticipate that this project will start mid-June.
I think one important thing to be aware of is that the East Bay, unfortunately, the East Bay Mud Recycled Water Line project has been put on hold by East Bay Mud, so that element of the project has been withdrawn.
So they're developing a master plan, and then the master plan will inform the next locations for the purple pipeline. So that's what they said.
So would that result in construction at a later date?
Construction, yeah, the Schedule A of the schedule of items was eliminated. The Schedule A was the East Bay Mud, the trench for the wet utility.
I think it's probably pretty unlikely that the recycled water line's coming here. I think it's probably not cost effective for them to run it to Albany.
Okay, period.
There are lots of segments along runs parallel to Interstate 80, and apparently there's lots of problems with the main getting it up here. So, and we don't have a relatively high water user like a golf course, or it used to be the racetrack was probably the original idea, but they changed the track surface so they don't use as much water anymore. While we've done a lot of, it would be there'd be a major investment on the part of East Bay Mud to landscape, or to irrigate the Albany Greenway.
Okay.
It's possible, but I wouldn't count on that anytime soon.
Let's see what the master plan says.
So do you have a target date for start of construction?
Right now it's vague at mid-June right now. We don't have exactly the date, but today we instructed the contractor to provide the preliminary submittals, which is basically the water control, the traffic control, and schedule. And therefore, I don't remember the other one, but that's what we provided. They need 2 weeks to submit those. So we need to approve them, and then we can start. They're going to start on San Pablo Avenue for the AT&T and Comcast joint trench.
So the deficit was approved?
Yeah, council approved the deficit. Okay.
So starting in June, and how long is the construction time?
180 days,
Okay.
6 months.
Wow.
180 days.
And then as a different phase, PG&E comes in to,
A year later.
a year later, PG&E comes in
remove the poles.
to remove the poles. Which is the ultimate goal. One of the many ultimate goals of this is to get rid of those poles.
And then we get to do the bike path? Or bike lanes?
The bike lanes will be done within the 180.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
so,
this time next year, we'll have them.
so right. So
So none of those poles are within the right-of-way of the bike lane?
okay, so they are in the in the parking lane. And they're going to be, that's another deliverable is the control plan to protect the poles so they're visible and not another collision hazard.
Yeah.
So, yeah, unfortunately, that's the way it is, and we cannot change that. But we've been saying that over and over, so I hope nobody, I'm sure we're going to hear somebody say, why you do this? I mean, but
So in the intervening period, those parking spaces won't be usable? Like they'll have
probably
poles in
not,
the middle of
or
them.
the poles, because the poles will be protected, they need something very visible and reflective at night so people don't hit them. It's not going to be as beautiful the first year, but
But the bike lanes
But the bike
will
lanes,
be
yeah.
there. That's
Yes.
pretty
Yes.
important.
Definitely.
And as I said, it's taken from 2010
So-
for the creation of the district. And
Yeah, this has been an enormously complex project, and it will continue to be an enormously
Yeah.
complex project to manage. So,
I think we do have public comment on
But I
this.
think we have more questions, though. Oh.
I know you guys, the budget was tight and you had to ask for extra funds. I was just doing back of the envelope calculation on the soft costs, and they look like for the Albany portion, the soft costs are somewhere around 7.5%, which seems low.
7%?
7, yeah, of the construction, and then the overall project, it's somewhere around the same, like 6 or 7%. So I just want to make sure that you guys feel comfortable, staff feels comfortable with the amount of money going into design and CM, as well as the contingency. I think you're using a standard contingency, which is, I guess, okay.
we used
15%?
15%.
Yeah.
Originally, we had used 20%, but then we needed more money to match that
Right,
one.
right. So knowing that you're tighter on the budget, what's the confidence level of delivering the project? And is that going to be an issue?
We have I mean, this project actually has the most agreements that you can ever imagine. And even asking other cities that have done Rule 28, we have more controls than anybody else.
Okay,
So
that's good.
I'm not saying that things will not be over budget, but we think that 15% for us is we're confident that it's going to be enough. Now, the utility companies, they haven't given us their contingency levels. They have it in their own books. And then that's where they're going to use for change orders and things like that.
Okay.
But they have to approve the change order. So when a change order comes in, the inspector from the utility companies will have to approve it as well, send it to the project manager, and then they have a 2-week turnout, and then we can actually, we're asking that a 2-week turnaround would be faster because we need to pay this contractor or approve it within a month. So we are required to do that. So it's a very complicated process, and
But your other soft costs, you guys feel comfortable with?
yeah, we feel comfortable with the other stuff. It's about 7%. So I mean, 5% sometimes is between 5 and 10. So
Right.
we're within the threshold.
Right, okay.
just to clarify that project budget summary table, this is kind of an allocation of costs. So while the total, using construction management as an example, 223,000, that's the total project budget that we're controlling and using. The city's share of that is 73,000.
Yeah.
So we're not limited to only 73,000 for construction management.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the companies will reimburse up to 50% or what. It's basically it's going to be based on actuals, but this is the allocation. Yeah.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
Last Friday on Bike About Town, which is a public ride that the rec department leads, and Brendan Brown, who's behind the camera there, led it. We actually went on this stretch. We went on the Buchanan Path and crossed to Marin, and it's just super hairy. I mean, but you have to do what you have to do, and you have to show people how you get places properly when you need to go from point A to point B. But 2 strollers and rollers basically control traffic to make sure everyone, the less experienced riders, could cross comfortably. And then I just took the lane, and some people rode on the sidewalk, and I just sat in the middle of that right lane, and it was fine, and everyone eventually got to Cornell, and it was hairy. And then Saturday at the bike rodeo, a lot of parents were asking about this very stretch, and Marta Vučković said, oh, my daughter and I were almost killed twice on that. It was crazy. It was really, I was going to call up the mayor. I didn't know what to, I said, well, it's funny because I just saw that there's been funding approved and blah, blah, blah. But so when can we tell Marta and these other people, like, is that the bike lanes will be done? Is that December?
Something
the
like that.
bike lanes
Yeah.
are projected, weather permitting and all that kind of stuff to be done in December. All right. Got that, Marta? Thanks.
Thank you.
That'll be good. My son's decided he doesn't like riding on the sidewalk there anymore, so now he follows me on Marin, which freaks me out.
I know.
Have him go in front of you so you can see what he's doing and you can yell at him. That's what I always used to do. I can't yell at my kids when they're behind me and I can't see what they're doing. But if they're in front of me, I can direct them.
I'll have to fight my aversion to going slow on that section.
You can't go on the sidewalk anyway. There's always trucks parked there.
I go on the street.
Yeah,
I go
I
faster
understand.
than
I
the
understand.
cars.
It's physically difficult to go on the sidewalk there, is what I'm saying.
Very true.
I'm sorry, we're
The
tangenting.
gas station issues, yeah.
Yes, yes.
So you don't need any action from us on this, right?
Which is a report.
So, great. Thank you very much, by the way.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Anything else? All right, the next one is a report on Washington Avenue traffic calming neighborhood meeting, and I need to leave for this one. I think you do too.
Which section? Oh, yeah, that one? I think so.
So this can be very brief because I assured the members of the community that the commission wouldn't go into an in-depth discussion tonight. We want to do that next month when we have proper public notice. But we did have a workshop with 8 or 9 members of this neighborhood last week. Commissioner McCroskey was there.
I think it was last week, yeah.
And
17th.
The 17th, yes.
the primary purpose of the workshop was to provide the neighborhood in a meeting format that they like. They're much more comfortable in kind of a conversational sort of framework rather than coming to one of your meetings and getting there 3 minutes and then having to sit down. But we had our consultants from Kittleson present an analysis of their most recent proposal, which is to create some parking pockets, narrow the sidewalks in various places to the minimum in order to create some parking spaces, on-street parking spaces, but have it arranged in such a way that there would be accessible parking, accessible sidewalks, and people would no longer be allowed, we would enforce not allowing people to park on the sidewalk.
This was a proposal by the neighbors, not by the consultant?
That's correct.
Okay.
The original idea came from a group of the neighbors. So we had a good discussion about that. What we'd like to do is bring to you next month a detailed report with public notice going to the neighborhood and the consultant being here to be able to, perhaps hopefully have you make a recommendation to the city council about how to proceed with the next steps in the project. I thought it was a very good discussion with the folks that were there. There has continued to be a little bit of back and forth emails since then, with some online discussion going on as well. Commissioner McCroskey sure has some additional insights that could, but again, I would just I normally wouldn't kind of try to stifle a detailed conversation, but I did assure them that you wouldn't go too far in depth because we weren't going to have time to do a proper public notice for tonight.
So I just want to make sure I understand what was presented where and when. The draft technical memorandum that you attached to the agenda for this meeting, it's dated May 17th, was that something that the consultants prepared before the neighborhood meeting?
Yes.
And they presented it at the neighborhood meeting?
Yes.
Okay,
And was gone over in detail.
okay.
So from my standpoint, this is the second of these more informal meetings that I've gone to. And there are some quite active neighbors who, one of whom proposed this idea. And it was great that the city was able to bring in a consultant and flesh out this information. On the first page of the draft technical memorandum, under objectives, these are actually things that were come up with at the first meeting, or the meeting in November, I think it was.
December 15.
Thank you. So late last year. And I think they were very indicative and agreed to at that meeting that these were the priorities in order. And it's kind of important. So that providing a pedestrian pathway along the corridor was the number one. Minimizing loss of on-street parking was second, and it turned out reducing speeding was third. That doesn't mean it's not important, but that was the general priority. There was some dissension about that at this last meeting, so I don't think it's a closed book, but when there was a larger group, this was the consensus. So the engineers were able to take it to a point of analysis based on sort of general property lines and what they could see without detailed sort of site survey. So if this idea is going to go further, it needs to be really planned and engineered and worked out on a house-by-house basis. So we discovered in the meeting, for example, I'm not going to go into discussion, but just to flesh it out a little bit and set expectations. In the meeting, we discovered that at least one of the residents for whom there was a possibility of having a cutout in front of their house, the analysis showed that it wasn't likely. And there's a better term for that in here. It was
Low feasibility.
Sorry?
Low feasibility.
Yes, it had low feasibility, but the resident who lived behind that sidewalk was there and indicated that the shrubbery on their property was hiding a very good retaining wall that could allow the sidewalk to be extended without a lot of trouble. So these sorts of things, there were issues about height of sidewalk and retaining walls. So there are a lot of details to work out with this plan, and actually moving the curb is a relatively expensive venture. So I think it's important to understand that more engineering and much more cost is involved in this particular solution. It's innovative, but costly. Also, it's become clear that, well, as Aleda has said, I think we talked about earlier that they were expecting to do a raised crosswalk at Catherine's Walk. And so that has to get into the mix as well. Anytime you bring up a crosswalk or an improvement or anything, the first question the residents ask is, does that involve loss of parking? And often it does. So there's a balance. So in the short run, it may be that we want to focus on several pathways,
maybe there's a short-run pathway for implementing a raised crosswalk, looking into speed humps where they're appropriate. And I'm getting so,
I went there.
right, so determining that, sort of nailing that down, and Aleda's telling me it's already nailed down. The cutouts are a longer run thing. And how do we balance access and for pedestrians and sidewalk users along with maintaining as much parking as possible? So it's still convoluted, and this is an attempt to answer some of the questions. Would you say that's
Yes.
okay?
And I think a big part of the discussion that we'd like to present to you next month is, what do we do in the immediate term of, do we continue not to enforce parking on, no parking on sidewalks? And that's, would have a dramatic effect on a lot of people who live in that neighborhood. But it's obviously the vehicle code and good practice to not allow people to park on existing sidewalks, so.
Couple of just technical questions. What's the current cross-section measurements for sidewalk and roadway?
For the roadways, so need to feed in the sidewalk,
22?
yeah, the roadway.
Yeah.
In the sidewalk is, I think, 4 feet in every, it depends on the area because it's a little bit wider on the eastern segment of.
Okay. You would have to widen the sidewalk in certain sections in order to maintain the 4 feet and then also get the parking pockets? Is that correct?
Yeah.
And so is there right-of-way issues? Like, are you going into private property?
No, we would do all this.
In-
The right-of-way extends into what people perceive as their private landscaping. So there
got
might be
it.
some
So that's your-
encroachments into those.
That's your golden ticket, okay.
Their existing retaining walls might need to be removed and replaced further back in some cases.
Private property retaining walls?
No,
Front-
they're in the private, they're in the public right of way, but they are private retaining walls.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
They were built by
the property
residents
owner.
in the public right of way.
Presumably. I'm assuming, yes.
That's interesting.
So the most instructive thing you can probably do is take the plans that are included in the handout tonight, or and actually walk the street.
Walk it, right?
Or take a look on Street View, although it's a little hard to see that way. But it's not simple. There's one location where there's a retaining wall, and such that so something about the footing of the retaining wall and raising the height of the sidewalk might solve a problem, but that didn't get analyzed. There are a lot of details.
Yeah.
So if we're to ask the city council for this, not only are we asking for a quite expensive solution, but we're also asking for a lot of engineering.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it would be helpful to have like a ballpark idea of what we might try and ask for to initiate this project.
Yeah, I'm not, I will hope we have
If not,
we have enough information to even ballpark it.
would you be able to ballpark the engineering and not the construction?
We could probably do that.
Because that would give us at least,
Right.
The beginning.
I'm really reluctant to, I mean, once you put a cost estimate out there, the world gloms onto that thing, and
I understand.
agree.
we don't know enough.
But if we're going to ask the city council for something,
But, it's probably a 6 to 12-month design effort. And yeah, we can put a price to that.
So where does this go next month?
Next month, it will come here with community participation.
Okay. But staff doesn't have a recommendation of any sorts yet?
We will next month.
Oh, okay.
So, I mean, maybe it's, you know, how many hundreds of $1,000s worth of engineering or,
Right.
you know,
It'll be six figures.
yeah, I would assume it would be.
Yeah,
And that's just for the engineering.
right,
Yeah.
absolutely. Sorry.
We're just trying to be realistic. It's,
Yeah.
you know,
Big deal.
it's a big ask.
The only other thing I wanted to say is just minor, but so I saw the consultants' cross sections. If the neighborhood's listening, you guys should use Street Mix.
Street what?
Street Mix, are you guys familiar with that?
No.
It's like a web-based app called Street Mix, and you're allowed to do free cross sections. You can
Street
throw in-
mix?
I think streetmix.com.
Is that where you
Not common,
drag
not bad.
improvements on from the side?
Exactly.
I've used that.
Right? So
yeah,
you can do
yeah.
sidewalk width, you can do bike lane width, you can do transit lanes, you can do, but it's good for, it's much better than looking in plan, and you can just do different cross sections. Very easy to use. You don't have to be any type of
It's
engineer.
not like a SketchUp or something like that?
It's even easier than SketchUp.
Really?
Because everything's prefabbed already. So
Yeah.
like as Ken said,
Is
you
it
just
good
drop
for
your stuff.
measurements or just for sort of conceptual?
Yeah, if you know your
Cross it.
end-to-end right-of-way dimension, then you can just fit in elements in there. So how wide you want your sidewalk, how wide you want your lanes, parking lane, your center median. None of that's going to be fitting here.
Yeah.
But for small streets, it's good.
At some point, it's become clear to me that it might be constructive to have a map that actually shows what parking will survive given the various treatments.
Right.
That's one thing that you know, and that may be politically difficult or functionally difficult, but we kept coming back in the conversation to individual members of the community, of the neighborhood saying, well, how does that affect this parking space? How does that affect that parking space? And we certainly weren't at that level of detail with this report, but there's certainly the desire for that level of detail. And
Also, it would be interesting to see the cost per parking space that we're, once we have a cost estimate of construction.
That was something we talked a little bit about. Some of these would be relatively easy to implement. Some of them, if you're removing a retaining wall
yeah.
for parking space, is that a cost-effective parking space?
Right, and block by block, how does that affect the overall supply of parking?
Right. So that will be a substantive agenda item next month.
Maybe that's the only.
Yeah.
Okay, that was a report.
Pretty cool, huh? Design industry.
I'm going to be just playing with
Yeah,
this for the rest of the meeting. Don't expect any attention.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, great.
And you just,
So should we end this item and call our colleagues back in?
so fun.
Are they listening?
Amy, could you, they're coming. That's pretty good. We did without a chair.
We were orderly.
We can handle it. So I have a couple of announcements. I have a couple of announcements. Do you have?
Yeah. Oh,
Announcements. I don't know if we have any announcements.
Solano Avenue, we already said.
Well, that's a future agenda items.
Yeah.
We have
We got a grant. I think-
we
you
have
know
a
that
grant
we
to
got
do
it.
some.
You announced that already. It
Okay,
was in the
good.
minutes.
Yeah.
That's it. then.
Okay. Well, so I wanted to mention that I attended a couple of meetings about the East Bay Regional Park District waterfront plan. And in fact, on Tuesday night, the city council voted to send a message to the East Bay Regional Park District saying that they would be willing to make space on Buchanan for parking spaces, additional parking spaces, to be devoted to serving the waterfront, so that that would open up to more open space near the beach area and less duplication of turning circles and pavement. There was an alternative plan that had been come up by Susan Moffett, working with other people, and it proposed lengthening out the beach open space, moving the Bay Trail a little bit back further, and creating a more natural environment at that end, and keeping the parking on Buchanan instead of turning it around onto the sort of to the south behind the beach. So they indicated that they were willing to do that. This impacts us because we set parking time limits recently for the entirety of Buchanan. It was indicated by kayakers especially that those time limits were prohibitive for them. So we might want to keep an eye on that and be ready to address that.
I'm sorry, we do have an announcement. We have kicked off the consulting contract with Parisi Associates for the Kains Adams Bikeway, counterflow bikeway study. And we are proposing, we haven't done anything other than to pick a date for a community meeting, kind of the community listening introductory session on June 15th here. I think that's a Thursday.
Yeah.
And that's to just kind of get the members, the people who live along Kains and Adams, talking with the consultants, talking about what their experiences are as both as bicyclists and as residents. We're also planning to do a walking audit on a Saturday morning. I believe that's June 24th.
It says following weekend after June 15th.
And that will be for people to get kind of hands-on and look at individual, yes, Saturday, June 24th. And then with those two meetings, the consultants will go off and do some work for a couple months and come back with a report to the commission probably in September, October timeframe.
I will not be here for those times, so hopeful somebody here might be able to attend. I won't be in town.
I'm certainly interested.
It should be really interesting. Hopefully they're as talented as they seemed in their.
I have another announcement.
Yeah, we're working on the on flyers and public outreach as we speak right now.
Right. This is something that we just finalized a few hours ago.
Hot off the press.
Hot off the press.
Great. I also wanted to mention that currently there is back-in angle parking on Center Street in Berkeley between MLK and Shattuck. It's a little different because it's a one-way street currently, and it's on the left-hand side of the street.
But if temporary for construction?
Yes.
I'm going to defer to Fareed on that, but yeah, there's construction going on in the downtown garage, so that street is somewhat blocked off. But it's an interesting chance to practice your back-in angle parking and try it out.
And if you want to do more left-handed back-in angle parking, by the end of summer, there will be 3 or 4 blocks of it on Durant as well.
Oh, okay.
Also temporary?
That will be permanent.
Ooh.
It goes in conjunction with the Bancroft repaving, which will do a cycle track and a bus
So you
lane
get more parking spaces on that.
to balance the loss of parking on one street by adding it on another. Lots of fun stuff.
Great. Anything else we should know about? Or you would recommend we?
I would use up too much of your time.
Yeah, all right.
I wanted to mention an upcoming event at Climate One, which is a lecture series. I think it's part of the Commonwealth Club in San Francisco. This is on Thursday, June 8th at 6 p.m. called Chain Reaction, Why 2 Wheels Are Better Than 4. Getting out of a car and onto the bike is one of the best things you can do for the climate and your personal health, blah, blah, blah. Many cyclists are still worried. What are cities doing to take cycling to the next level? How is pedal power helping the broader climate movement? Join us for a conversation about cycling as a way to change urban America and cut carbon emissions.
Who are the speakers in?
It doesn't actually say. Climate1.org is where you can go.
Climate1.org.
Climate1, CLIMATEONE.org. Has more information about this.
And it's next Tuesday,
June 8th, yeah, Thursday, June
Thursday.
8th, in San Francisco.
Yeah, I've been there.
And there is a fee.
That's actually 2 weeks.
2 weeks. Yeah.
Yeah. Any other announcements?
Yeah, I won't be here next meeting either.
Uh-oh.
I'll be camping with Boy Scouts.
Oh, that's right.
So you won't have two of us, but
If we spend time on Washington,
it's a good thing.
Perfect. Do that.
We won't be making any
I think that's
decisions.
a
yeah.
smart.
One item on the agenda.
Oh, I see where the speakers are listed, if you want me
Oh.
to go back to that.
Okay.
Amy Harcourt from Bikes Make Life Better. Kaylee Quinn, Director of the Climate Ride. Brian Wiedenmeyer, Director of San Francisco Bicycle Coalition.
Oh, okay.
Commonwealth?
Good question.
So future agenda items,
Probably does.
do I go over these or do you?
I don't, unless you, I don't know, that we
Something that
need
you
to
wanna
take the
add.
time, but,
Or you-
yeah,
Well, I
if
think-
there's something you want to add, or,
If you can do June for Washington, that would be good. I don't know if that was June or July or both, but
Could be June or July.
well,
June would be
So
better,
June would be better.
considering.
Because the recusal people are going to be missing anyway.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
that will mean if any of the other three of you have any issues, please do let us know, because would need all three of you at the meeting.
I'll be here.
I'll be here.
Here.
Yeah. Are we fairly certain the sidewalk program will come in July? And are we hopeful that it might happen this year?
We have a lot going on in our tiny little public works department, including moving. So we haven't lost track of the importance of that program.
And there's lots of stuff going
And
on.
there's lots of stuff
Yeah.
going on. So we'll,
I know there's some work being done on the design of the pavement, next pavement project, but it's getting a little bit slow. I mean, I know that Ryan McLean is working with the main consultant for the ATP striping on the pavement, so directly they're working together. Like overlapping the striping plans on the pavement plans, but
Great.
we don't know yet. I mean, let's keep it here and then moving forward, I mean, in time. But it's good to keep them in the list, I think.
I'm assuming we're not having a meeting in August?
No,
that's correct.
Okay.
All right. Anything else? It's time to adjourn the meeting at 10:56.
9:56.
9:56. Oh my gosh.
We made it.